Chapter 7. Our first Christmas in Australia was our second without Mother. In some ways it was easier, because a summer Christmas was different from any we had experienced before, and we could not be nostalgic. The 86-degree heat wilted the tree, and us along with it. Uncle Ota cooked billy can pudding over a fire in the back garden, and Ranjana made spicy samosas and tongue-burning curry. I cooked a dish of mushrooms and barley called hobovi kuba, but the mushrooms were not as sweet, and I realized that Uncle Ota's subversion of traditions and creation of fresh ones was based on sound reasoning. Better the novelty of the new than the shadow of the old. "I'm enjoying my Australian Christmas," Clara told me. "I don't have to look at the poor carp at the markets." I wondered what she would have said if she had seen the fly-speckled leg of ham that the butcher had delivered to Mrs. Fisher down the road that morning. It was 4 days into the new year when the notes from Mrs. Bain on piano technique stopped. She'd had chest pains before Christmas, but we were still surprised when we saw the undertaker and his assistant leave Esther's house with a coffin. Esther was nowhere in sight, but we could imagine her watching her mother's departure from behind the curtains. There was no obituary or funeral notice in the newspaper, and we were at a loss about how to approach Esther to show her our support. "Esther may not want anyone else to be involved," suggested Uncle Ota. "I know Mrs. Bain was not kind to her, but she must feel the loss," I said. We became alarmed a few days later when a furniture removalist arrived at Esther's house and began carting away chairs and tables. "I hope Esther's not in trouble," said Uncle Ota. "We must visit her and see if there is anything we can do to help." We planned to pay Esther a visit the next day, but she turned up on our doorstep that afternoon. She twitched nervously when she spoke, but there was a light in her eyes that was new. "I have cleared the top floor of my house," she said. "I never use it. Would you like to live there instead of in this house? I'll reduce your rent if you help me clean the house and fix up the garden." Esther's offer stopped us in our tracks. She rubbed her chin, and her eyes darted from her feet to our waists before she could settle her gaze on our faces. "It's time for a change," she said. "I could do with some company." Esther's house was more comfortable than the one we had been renting from her. There was a sitting room upstairs with a view of the street, and I could observe people at the front gate without them seeing me. Clara and I shared a bedroom which overlooked the garden and had a silver gum outside the window. I would have liked to climb onto one of its branches, but Ranjana forbade it. "You want to break your neck? You can do it out of my sight," she said. Ranjana and Uncle Ota slept in the bedroom next to ours, with an alcove for Thomas's cot. Esther remained in her bedroom downstairs, but cleared the parlour so we could put Clara's piano there along with Uncle Ota's artifacts. I thought it was generous of Esther to give us so much space, especially as she already had a piano in the sitting room at the rear of the house. "And, of course, you must continue your Tuesday nights," she said. The camelback sofas, burgundy velvet chairs, and tapestries downstairs were Victorian in style, and when I passed them to go to the kitchen or bathroom, I knew what Clara meant when she said, "We are living on the set of an Oscar Wilde play." One night I woke up and could not go back to sleep. I went to sit in the room with a view of the street. The bush across the road was silver in the moonlight, and I saw a tawny frogmouth swoop down on some prey. Then I noticed the man standing by the gate. He wore a khaki military uniform and a high domed hat with a narrow brim and a strap under his jaw. The man had a pale, youthful face and innocent eyes. He seemed to be looking into the garden for something. I reached for the latch to open the window so I could call to him, but he vanished into thin air. The following morning I told Clara about the ghost. We had been brought up in a superstitious culture, and the existence of a spiritual world that paralleled our own was something we were at ease conversing about. After all, our house in Prague had been full of spirits. "He might be one of the young men who did not come back from the war," Clara suggested. I stood at the window in the sitting room every night for the next week to see if the man would appear again, but he did not. The Tuesday night meetings grew in size, and Uncle Otto could now afford to invite a paid guest lecturer each week. The first was a paleontologist who showed us prehistoric vertebrate fossils that had been discovered in Western Australia. He was followed by a member of the Horticultural Society who espoused the wonders of kikuyu grass, and an architect who implored us to stop promoting romanticism in a modern city. The most fascinating of all, however, was the talk by a lecturer from the University of Sydney's Anthropology Department about his travels in outback Australia. It was not just the subject of his address, the Aboriginal tribes of the inland, that captured our imagination, but also the medium he used to convey it. Dr. Parker turned up on our doorstep with 2 suitcases and a screen. Uncle Ota and I helped him set up his projector, and after his introduction, Ranjana turned down the lights. The reel began with a train journey through mountains. The picture had been shot from the front of the train and gave us the sensation that we were traveling on it. I stifled a scream when the train zigzagged around a tight bend with a precipice on one side. So real did the illusion appear. We saw open plains with kangaroos bounding across the grasslands, and isolated homesteads in stark but beautiful landscapes. Finally, Dr. Parker showed us footage of Aboriginal corroborees and tribal women preparing food on sheaths of bark. If we had seen photographs, we would have been engaged by such exotic sights, but it was the film that brought them so vividly to life. When the images shook and the tape came to an end with a click, it was a shock to find myself sitting in the parlour. After the screening, the audience asked questions about the Aboriginal tribes Dr. Parker had studied, and Uncle Ota and I also questioned him about the filming. What kind of camera he had used, what kind of film, how he had kept the camera steady during motion shots. He was flattered by our interest in such details and spoke with us long after the other guests had left, about varying shot depths and how to edit scenes for maximum impact. "I've seen kinetoscope parlours and Nickelodeons at fairs, but nothing like the quality production we saw tonight," Uncle Ota told me. "They say it's only a passing fad, but I believe moving pictures will be the art form of tomorrow." I thought back to an afternoon in Prague when I had been running errands and had passed a cinema with a poster of Paula Negri starring in gypsy blood in the glass display case outside. The actress's smoky eyes seemed to me the essence of glamour. Milos had forbidden us to go to the cinema. He described it as cheap entertainment for the masses, and even Mother had said she would prefer it if we went to the theatre or opera. That afternoon I watched the people line up at the box office and longed to follow them up the stairs and into that secretive world where stories were told in moving pictures. I had enough coins in my pocket to cover the ticket. No one would have noticed if I disappeared for a few hours. But I remembered Mother's warning never to attend entertainment on my own, and could not disobey. Uncle Ota announced that we would be going to the cinema the following Saturday. Esther volunteered to mind Thomas. While our landlady's personality was eccentric, her dedication to my cousin's welfare was not. When Thomas started crawling, Esther was vigilant that nothing was left on the floor that he could choke on, and any sharp surfaces were either turned to the wall or padded with wads of brown paper. Thomas could not be left in safer hands. Although we could only afford tickets in the stalls, we were going to the Saturday night session and dressed for the occasion. I wore a cocktail dress trimmed in turquoise sequins, while Clara dressed in a voile blouse with lemon piping and a matching skirt. Uncle Otto put on pinstriped trousers with his black tails and, to hide their worn appearance, added a new top hat and polished shoes. Ranjana did not own an evening dress, so I bought her one a few sizes larger than I could wear and pretended I had brought it from Prague with me. "It's too big," I told her, "and I haven't had time to take it in." Ranjana lifted her chin and stared down her nose at me. I did my best not to flinch. She was proud, and I was afraid to offend her. She and Uncle Otto would not take anything material from me. They said my contribution to the housework was enough. I had never cleaned anything in Prague, although Mother had taught us to sew, cook, and be tidy, but I did the sweeping and dusting of Esther's house and most of the gardening. Ranjana had also lived a privileged life in her first marriage, and Uncle Otto had been born into a wealthy family. It was ironic that we should have all ended up washing our own underwear and scrubbing the floors. But I did not mind it. I enjoyed the meditative quality of housework. "Thank you," said Ranjana, trying on the dress. The red satin sheath I had chosen was stunning against her dark skin. "You look like a queen," I told her. She rolled her eyes. "Let's just see if they let me in." Although in Prague we had regularly attended the opera and theatre, a ripple of excitement ran through me when we entered the foyer of the cinema. My eyes took in everything: the green carpet, the brass trimmings, the glittering chandeliers. Uncle Otto picked up our tickets, and we lined up at the marble counter for our box of fantail chocolates and malted milk. I took a breath when we stepped through the red curtains to the stalls, and an usherette in white gloves led us to our seats. The entry to the stalls was flush to the screen, so it was not until we reached our seats that I could make sense of the images on it. Slides for local businesses popped up in succession. While the others chatted, Clara and I read the slogans aloud. Lipton's Green Label Tea, only 6p a pound. Newtone Nerve Tonic will cure all your ills. When the patrons were seated, the curtain closed over the screen, and the usherettes shut the doors. The house lights dimmed. A door under the proscenium opened, and a man with sheet music under his arm stepped out. The audience clapped, and the man sat down at the piano and flexed his fingers. The audience rose when he began the national anthem, God Save the King. After the last crescendo was reached and the pianist lifted his hands from the keys, the audience reseated themselves. The usherettes opened the doors to let in latecomers. A couple took the seats in front of us. The woman placed a presentation box of chocolates on her lap. "All the ladies who came with a man have one," Clara whispered. She was on the brink of adolescence and showed romantic inclinations. Her observation was correct. The women accompanied by a man had chocolate boxes with pink bows on their laps, while the families and single people were content with Jaffas, jujubes, and columbines. Uncle Otto guessed what Clara and I were whispering about. When the lolly boy came by with a tray of sweets strapped around his neck, Uncle Otto purchased 3 presentation boxes. He gave one to Ranjana, one to me, and one to Clara. "Some men here only have one lady companion," he said with a smile. "I am lucky to be escorting the 3 most beautiful women in the room." When everyone had settled down, the pianist struck a dramatic chord, and the curtain parted. Although we had come to see The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, starring Rudolph Valentino, we were enthralled by the short film that preceded it. Although it was a cartoon, I was captivated by Felix the cat bouncing around the screen chasing Skidoo the mouse. It was miraculous to me that a picture could move. When Felix and the mouse became pals after taking to a flask of drink, the audience burst into laughter. The curtains closed again. Green lights flashed up around the pianist, and I saw that he had been joined by a violinist, a flautist, and a trumpeter who had turned on their music stand lights. A hush fell over the audience when the musicians began playing a tango, and the opening credits for The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse appeared on the screen. I was lost to the hypnotic play of light and shadow of the picture. I had thought a film might be something like a theatre play without dialogue, but it was different. The actors were apparitions, not people, and the way they conveyed their emotions, a lean towards an object to indicate interest, the tilt of the head to express love, the raising of an eyebrow to show surprise, was much closer to ballet than theatre. Their makeup was otherworldly too. Ashen face powder, blackened eyes, and Cupid bow pouts painted on their lips. The anti-war theme of the film stirred me, reminding me of what had happened to Esther's love and the broken men I had seen in the streets of Prague and Sydney. I was amazed at how the story of two cousins who find themselves on opposite sides in the war could be brought to life so poignantly with moving images interspersed with titles. When Valentino danced his famous tango scene, Clara dug her fingers into my arm, and when the credits appeared and the audience applauded, I had to blink a few times to come back to the real world. After that first night, we were hooked. We went to the pictures every Saturday evening, and during the week when we could afford it. Sometimes, as a treat, we went to the city cinemas, where the pictures were preceded by vaudeville shows with chorus girls, comedians, and singers. We saw everything on the program, and I soon realized that my first taste of film had been a production of superb quality. There was plenty of melodrama showing as well, and we often found ourselves in fits of laughter at over-gesticulated actions and implausible plots. Clara and I would analyze why these films were so terrible. The intertitles described things we could see for ourselves, said Clara. Oh, look, Margaret, the train is about to go off the tracks. The best intertitles are the ones that voice the important lines, then cut back into the same action shot, I agreed. Often Clara and I giggled because someone in the audience was reading the intertitles out loud, although if the picture was particularly incredulous, the entire audience did so in unison to override the boredom. There were no language barriers in silent pictures, and we watched films from around the world, clutching our armrests through the creepy The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and weeping over La Terre. But the films that captivated us most were Australian. They were realistic and had usually been filmed outdoors. We loved Franklin Barrett's A Girl of the Bush, not only for its plot, but also because the picture was punctuated with footage of horse mustering and sheep shearing. The sentimental bloke's portrayal of love among Woolloomooloo's poor pulled our heartstrings, although the intertitles, based on the poet C.J. Dennis's popular verse, mystified us. The world has got me snouted just a treat. Cruel fortune's dirty left has smote me soul. Uncle Ota read out. What on earth does that mean? Even Ranjana, with her dictionary perfect English, could not enlighten us. But the intertitles were not important. The leads, Arthur Tauschirt and Lottie Lyle, told the story with their eyes. The afternoon and evening cinema sessions ran set programs, but in the mornings films were shown on a continuous basis. We could attend the morning sessions when Uncle Ota and Ranjana had afternoon shifts. Women often brought their young children along, so we invited Esther to join us while Thomas slept on Ranjana's lap. Unless we arrived at exactly 10 o'clock, however, it was impossible to time which picture was screening, and so we sometimes took our seats halfway through a film and then had to wait until it ran again to pick up the story at the point where we had entered. To reach the cinema, we travelled by tram, then walked 3 blocks. There was a pub on our route that was crowded no matter the time of day. The first time we passed it, the weather was pleasant, and the male patrons spilled out the doors onto the street. At first I thought they had gathered for a political meeting, as I had seen in Prague before the war when the Czech nationalists were vying for independence. But it was not politics on these men's minds. From the shouts I heard through the open windows, I realized they were sharing tips for the dog and horse races and drinking themselves blind. When the pub doors opened, I caught glimpses of men in serge suits, counters stacked with glasses turned upside down on towels, and barmaids rushing to take orders. At times, the reek of hops, urine, and vomit was overpowering, and we crossed the street to avoid it. One Saturday morning, a cold rain was falling. It was not enough to saturate our clothes, but it was enough to chill our bones. We alighted from the tram and hurried towards the cinema. Ranjana cradled Thomas to her chest, and Uncle Ota wrapped his arm around her shoulders. We passed the pub, and I heard a burst of voices as the door opened and closed. 2 men hurried by. They walked in front of Uncle Ota and Ranjana, who headed our group with Esther, Clara, and me behind. The men had made a point of overtaking us, but I assumed they must also be hurrying to the cinema. Then one of them, a lanky man with red scratches over his cheeks, turned, forcing us all to stop. The other man, shorter and with a squashed nose, fixed Ranjana with a hostile stare. "Black bitch," he muttered, before turning to Uncle Ota. "Can't you stand a white—" The blood pounded in my ears. I did not understand the meaning of the words the man used, only that they were obscene. The other man grabbed Ranjana by the hair, forcing her to the ground. Clara and I screamed. Ranjana flung her arms around Thomas, shielding him under her body, anticipating the kick the man shaped up for. But before he could hurt Ranjana, Uncle Ota punched the man in the jaw. The man's head snapped back, and he fell to the ground. The commotion caught the attention of the pub patrons. Some men ran outside, while others gathered at the windows. I thought the men who had come out were going to help us, but I was mistaken. The fat man punched Uncle Ota in the ribs, and the spectators cheered. "Show the bloody foreigner what you've got!" My mind flashed back to a scene I had witnessed in Prague when a Jewish student was set upon by some brutes. The men had kicked and punched the youth until his mouth bled, and his face was as blue as a berry, while my mother and I had shouted for the police. There was no one but these thugs around us now. Although Uncle Ota was against violence, he'd had to defend himself in dangerous situations during his travels. Being taller than his attacker, he had the advantage and gave the fat man as good as he got. Then I heard a glass break. The hairs on my neck stood on end. A man held a broken tumbler from the window, and one of the men outside took it and passed it along with the aim of getting it to the fat man. I tried to shout a warning, but my voice cracked. I rushed towards the fat man. Everything turned to slow motion like a strange dream. A man in the crowd held up the tumbler and stepped towards me. He's going to cut my throat, I thought. Uncle Ota threw a punch that knocked the fat man out cold, and at the same time my foot shot up and delivered a kick to the man with the tumbler's groin. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his crotch. The other men looked shocked that their burly mate had been downed by a woman. Uncle Ota seized the moment to pick up Ranjana and Thomas, grab Clara's hand, and scream to Esther and me to run. We made it to an alley before we realized that we were not being pursued. We crouched in a dark corner and caught our breath. A police siren wailed, and we heard voices shouting abuse at the officers. Perhaps we should have returned to give our side of the story, but we were terrified. We hurried to the end of the alley, then made our way to a tram stop a few streets away. When we were safely on board a tram, Clara dropped her head in her hands. There would be no pictures that day. When the tram passed by the pub on our trip home, the closed sign had been posted in the window. I looked at my shoe and realized I had split the sole when I'd kicked the man. We never again attended the cinema near the pub. Instead, we took the tram further along the line to another suburb. I had been in love with my new country. After the attack, my relationship with Australia was uneasy. I was wary of Australians, wondering if they would lash out at me. Ranjana and Uncle Ota no longer walked side by side in public. Uncle Ota marched in front, his eyes scanning the streets for possible trouble. Ranjana, with Thomas in her arms, stayed a discreet distance behind. Anyone looking on would have assumed that they did not know each other. Ranjana and I knew we would face this when we got married. Uncle Ota explained to me when I expressed my disgust at the situation. We endure it because we love each other. If Beaumont Smith's film about a white man and a Maori girl is so popular, maybe people will accept marriages like yours, I said hopefully. Uncle Ota dispelled the idea. Beaumont Smith's leading lady isn't a Maori, he said. She's as white as the Queen Mother. They have smeared blackface over her. That's why people accept it. It's not real. The attack had shaken my confidence in Australians, but I was proud that I had defended myself. Ranjana stopped speaking to me like a child and treated me with respect. But Clara had been badly affected by the incident. She often woke up in the night screaming that she wanted to go home. We are safe from Miloš here, I told her. We are not safe, she wept. We are not safe anywhere. I was at a loss as to how to make her feel secure again. Clara's nerves were not helped by the letter we received from Prague. I was sitting in the parlour watching the street and listening to Clara play a Brahms waltz when I saw Ranjana walk to the front gate to collect the mail from the postman. He handed her a letter in a brown envelope. She looked at the postmark and ran back inside the house. "Ota!" she called. "Adelka, Clarinka. A letter from Prague." Clara stopped playing, and Uncle Ota rushed into the room with Thomas under his arm. He had been feeding Thomas and had pumpkin stains on his shirt. Ranjana handed Uncle Ota the letter and took Thomas from him. She sat down on the sofa and bounced her son on her lap. Uncle Ota opened the letter and sat down next to Ranjana to read it out to us. "My dear brother, it has been almost a year since my last correspondence to you, and I know you must have been worried by the silence. Please forgive me. Dr. Holub checked with the shipping company that Adela and Clara had arrived safely and were accepted into Australia. I had to content myself with the knowledge that my nieces were out of harm's way, for I now understand what their dear mother meant when she said she was being watched. Dr. Holub was with me when I informed Miloš that I had sent Adela and Clara to America to be with their aunt and uncle. explaining that I had done so because Dr. Holub had received information that the girls were in danger. Of course, we did not reveal that we knew the source of this danger was Milos himself, but instead hinted at an anonymous kidnapper who was aware that the girls are heiresses to a fortune. I had expected Milos to be enraged, but instead he thanked us for acting so quickly in regard to the protection of his stepdaughters. This calm response unnerved me. Is it possible he believes that we suspect nothing? Milos said that he would like to correspond with Adela and Clara, which I assumed was a ploy to find out where they are living. Dr. Holub explained that for the girls' security, he was the only one who was entrusted with their address, and correspondence would put them at risk. Milos became hostile then, and refused to sign the allowance at the bank. Now we find ourselves in a stalemate. Since that meeting, Dr. Holub has found that his mail is being tampered with, while I live with a mysterious man posted daily outside my house. Because of this, Dr. Holub and I are reluctant to contact you and the girls, lest we give away your whereabouts. I hope that the money I sent with the girls proves sufficient for their upkeep a while longer. Please let my nieces know that even when I do not write, I think of them with love every day. Each morning I go to the church and light a candle for them. Tell Adela and Clara that Fripp sends a lick. With all my love, Josephine. Although the thought of Dr. Holub's mail being tampered with and Aunt Josephine being spied upon were discomforting, at least now we had a reason for the lack of correspondence from Prague. If I could change one thing, however, it would be that Uncle Otto had not read out the letter in front of Clara. She became more nervous than ever, and so fearful for Aunt Josephine's safety that I awoke one night to find her pacing the bedroom floor. "Clara, come back to bed," I told her. She shook her head and continued to walk. "I'm praying," she answered. "I'm praying for us all." I had enrolled Clara at the Conservatorium High School for the following year. We had enough funds to cover the musical tuition, but if Clara or I should need anything else, I did not want to have to ask Uncle Otto for the money. I thought about the typing lessons I had taken with Aunt Josephine in Prague. I cared for Thomas in the afternoons, but I wondered if I could find a morning or night job to bring extra money into the household. Before I had a chance to start looking, another opportunity to contribute to the household arose. The new cinema we attended was a smaller affair and shabbier, but the selection of films was interesting. We saw a flashy version of Camille, starring Rudolph Valentino and the Russian actress Alla Nadzimova, who we all agreed resembled Clara. But most of the time it showed a selection of quality European films and local productions. One Saturday night when we were leaving the cinema, Clara voiced her disappointment that there had not been a live pianist to accompany the program, only a gramophone. "I agree," said Uncle Otto. "The story was flat without a musician. A pianist can make or break a picture." "Perhaps Clara should have offered her services," Ranjana said with a smile. "Could she?" We turned to see the cinema manager in the doorway of his office. We shuffled our feet, embarrassed because we had not seen him standing there. "Seriously?" he said. "Could she?" The manager's facial hair was trimmed to follow the line of his chin. He looked like a wizened Abraham Lincoln. "I cannot get anyone for Saturday night. The big cinemas offer too much money." We chuckled at the suggestion. Mother had instilled in Clara and me a sense of dressing well, and although she wore no makeup, Clara appeared mature for her years. "My sister is a fine pianist," I replied, "but she is only 12 years old." The manager's mouth opened as if he were on the verge of apologizing when he was seized by another idea. "What a novelty that would be," he said. "No one in Sydney has a pianist as young as that." He introduced himself as Mr. Tilley and urged us to return to the auditorium so he could hear Clara play. We obliged him. Clara rarely declined an opportunity to play, and the acoustics of the cinema would be a new experience for her. Mr. Tilley led Clara to the piano while the rest of us took seats in the front row. He opened the fall board, and Clara warmed her hands with a scale. I marvelled at my sister. If I had been put on the spot like that, I would have fallen to pieces. Clara commenced Chopin's Mazurka No. 23 in D major from memory. Mr. Tilley's jaw dropped. Something about Clara's poise and her ability to concentrate gave her the air of a serious musician, but I doubted he was expecting her to be as good as she was. When Clara finished the piece, he could not contain his excitement. "Bring this young lady back for a proper audition on Monday night," he said. "Some of the Hollywood films have scores she can practice, but for most of the films we show here, the pianist needs to be able to improvise with whatever comes out of the projector. If she can keep up with the intertitles, she can have the Saturday night slot. I will pay her a fair wage, and you can have free tickets." The offer was tempting, but I had doubts. It might ruin her chances of being taken seriously as a concert pianist, I whispered to Uncle Ota. "On the contrary," he replied, "she can put the money towards extra tuition at the Conservatorium High School." "Please let me take the audition, Adelka," Clara said. Clara was excited by the idea of playing for films, and she practiced all the next day, to the neglect of her homework and household chores. The city cinemas had orchestras and chorus lines, but Mr. Tilley's suburban cinema relied on a single pianist. The Saturday night session was the most important of all, and it was obvious he was going to use Clara's age as a drawcard. Clara selected pieces from her repertoire to suit different moods: suspense, romance, weariness, confusion. She wrote out captions on pieces of cardboard. "The villain escapes," "The heroine enters," and asked me to swap them quickly until she could slip from one piece of music to another without hesitation. On Monday evening, Uncle Ota and I accompanied Clara to the cinema for her audition. "My father was a picture showman," Mr. Tilley reminisced while guiding Clara to the piano. "My mother and I travelled with him to the country towns where he'd set up his posters and limelight projector. They never wanted us to leave. It might be months before they saw another moving picture." Mr. Tilley nodded to the projectionist. The lights dimmed, and a picture we had not seen before appeared on the screen: The Man from Kangaroo. It was full of drama and romance, as well as fight scenes and horse chases. The film turned out to be a 6-reel feature. Mr. Tilley already knew that Clara had the talent, but he wanted to be certain that she had the stamina. Clara matched the action without a slip, and even continued to play during the reel changes. When the lights came up, Mr. Tilley's face was flushed with excitement. "I'll have posters made," he said. "The youngest talent in Sydney plays at Tilley's Cinema." He turned to Clara. "What's your last name?" "Rose," she replied. That was Uncle Ota's anglicized name, and, in a way, it was Father's name too. Uncle Ota seemed pleased. I decided I would make my surname Rose too. Uncle Ota and Mr. Tilley discussed the terms of Clara's employment, while Clara and I ate coconut macaroons in the cinema office. When the two men had agreed on a fee, Mr. Tilley offered Uncle Ota a cigar, and they sat back, blowing smoke rings into the air. "Who was the director of the film we saw?" Uncle Ota asked Mr. Tilley. "Wilfred Lucas, an American," Mr. Tilley answered. "Carroll Baker Productions brought him and his scriptwriter wife to Australia. They hoped that using American talent would secure an American market for the film." "Did it?" Mr. Tilley shrugged. "The picture show business isn't like it was before the war. Australian pictures were cheap to make then, and Australians wanted to see their own country. We had a bigger local industry than France or America. Now we have permanent cinemas and the overheads that go with them, as well as the largest picture-going population in the world. Showmen need a constant supply of films, and the only ones who can give us that are the Americans." "I should like to make a film about Australia one day," I announced. I was surprised by my own words. Where had that idea come from? I enjoyed taking pictures with my camera, but I did not know the first thing about making a film. "Why not?" said Clara. "You've always been good at telling stories, Adelka." Mr. Tilley smiled at me. "Make it a good picture then, young lady, and I'll screen it for you." After announcing my intention to make a film, I was obliged to follow through, especially as Clara had shown faith in me. It never occurred to us that being 19 years old and a foreigner might hamper my progress. Mr. Tilley gave me a list of Australian directors, and I wrote to them asking where they obtained their cameras and for how much, and how they found actors. I kept their suggestions in an indexed journal. Most of them advised me to use sets sparingly to save money, and to film outdoors to take advantage of Australia's bright sunlight rather than using costly studio lights. Raymond Longford wrote that if I kept my technical team to a maximum of 4, I could make an acceptable film for £2,000. Beaumont Smith undercut this with suggestions on how to make a box office smash for £1,000. In Prague, I might have had access to that amount of money, but I could not afford to be frivolous with our funds here in Australia. £1,000, I sighed to myself. Well, that's the end of that. Mr. Tilley's posters featuring the young virtuoso Clara Rose drew in the crowds, not just from the eastern suburbs, but from other localities as well. The Daily Telegraph took a picture of Clara. Her performances were so popular, Mr. Tilley asked to extend her performing nights, but I would not hear of it. "She's still a young girl. She needs her rest," I told him. In winter that year, Clara complained of headaches, and I wondered if she needed glasses. One afternoon she came home early from school looking pale. "You need fresh air," I told her. She agreed to come to Nielsen Park with Esther and me. When we arrived at the park, we found the gardeners busy planting Moreton Bay figs and brush box along the pathways. The park had been cleared of bushland, and the caretakers had realized too late that the result was stark and there were no trees left to give shade. We spread out our picnic blanket near one of the few remaining tuckaroo trees. Clara and I tugged off our shoes and strolled to the water, while Esther lay on her side on the rug. A blue butterfly landed on her hip. I was intrigued why Esther was a magnet for butterflies, and remembered that it was unusual to see butterflies this time of year. Esther had changed since her mother's death. She was still quiet, but she enjoyed going to the pictures with us. She gushed over shakes, swooned at Pacific Island romances, and cheered for the dancing girls. Perhaps having been robbed of her chance for love, Esther was living vicariously. "It's good to look at the horizon," I told Clara when we reached the shoreline. I had eye weakness when I was your age from too much reading. Aunt Josephine told me that close work tightens the muscles, and I needed to relax them by looking into the distance. The wind off the water was chilly, and there were no swimmers, but dozens of boats bobbed in the waves. A musical chirp trilled in the scrub above the rocks. "Look," I said, pointing out a blue bird flitting amongst the branches. "A superb fairy wren." My mind drifted to Mother sitting at the table in our Prague house with her paints and water jars. The picture of homely bliss lifted my spirits. Then I was hit by a pain in the pit of my stomach that struck whenever I thought about Mother. Milos had not only killed her, he had also destroyed my happy memories. If I remembered Mother, the joy was blighted by the thought of how she had died. "Blood!" cried Clara, lifting up her hand. I grabbed her wrist, thinking that she must have cut her hand on an oyster shell while my mind had been distracted, but there was no cut there, no sign of blood. "Blood! Blood! I can see her face!" Clara screamed. "Whose face?" I asked. Clara took a step back and stared at me with the same vacant eyes she had shown me that day on the ship when she thought she had seen Milos. Esther ran up to us. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "Blood!" Clara cried again. I grabbed her arms. "Clara!" I said, shaking her. "Clara!" Clara began sobbing. "Come," said Esther, putting her arm around Clara's shoulders and nodding towards the road. "We'd better go home." We would not have been able to get Clara back to the house in that condition on the tram, so Esther found a taxi. I was glad she was there to think for us. I helped Clara into the taxi and wrapped my coat around her. I was her older sister, but I did not watch her closely enough. Emily started hearing voices in her head. I remembered Mother's description of her sister's madness. "After I am gone, you must protect Clara and keep her safe. Do not lose sight of Clara the way I lost sight of my sister." Clara muttered inaudible sentences and tugged at her hair. It cannot happen so suddenly, I thought. It was as if the balance of the world had shifted, and my sister and I were standing on the edge of a cliff, about to topple off. Chapter 8. Dr. Norwood's rooms in Macquarie Street were as quiet as a church. Uncle Ota and I watched the clock tick minutes away into an hour. Every so often the secretary tapped out something on the typewriter. Uncle Ota's lips moved silently as he read the framed certificates on the walls. Psychiatry was not a well-known specialty in Australia. It had come into practice during the war to treat the soldiers who were shell-shocked. Despite the elaborate names that were now being used for it, the word madness frightened me. Visions of the asylum in Prague with its high walls and barred windows loomed. I had found the rumours of rat-infested dungeons and hapless patients shackled in chains chilling then. Now that Clara had become ill, I could not stand the thought of it. "That's not where your Aunt Emily was sent," said Uncle Ota when I told him my fears. "Your grandparents put her in a private asylum in the countryside, but her mind weakened her body, and she caught pneumonia." The tortured expression on Uncle Ota's face when he mentioned Aunt Emily worsened my anxiety. Surely Clara is not insane, I told myself, although that was the first thing that leapt into my mind when she had her attack. Since then, I wondered if she had simply suffered a nervous breakdown. After all, our mother had been murdered, we'd had to leave our home, and she had witnessed our family being attacked by a group of thugs. I was grateful that Uncle Ota and Ranjana agreed to find Clara the best help they could. Ranjana and I wanted to care for Clara at home, but the local doctor who saw us the afternoon of her episode would not hear of it. Should she wander outside in her present state of mind, she might be reported to the police, he said. Then she will be certified to a mental asylum, and you will have trouble getting her back. Dr. Norwood called us into his office and invited us to sit in the Chesterfield chairs. The oak-panelled walls and lace curtains gave the room a sense of coolness, but my heart was racing, and I broke into a sweat. Through a crack in the door to the examination room, I caught a glimpse of Clara lying down on a bench, with a nurse leaning over her. Dr. Norwood was in his early 50s, with skin the colour of old ivory. His manner of speech was decisive. "A sudden episode of psychosis," he said. "A delayed reaction to a shock." He went on to tell us that if we did not get hospital treatment for Clara, her health would become worse. "I will write you a referral to Broughton Hall. It is much better that Miss Rose goes to a voluntary clinic rather than a mental institution. I do not think the company of incurables does anything for one's equilibrium." The following day we took Clara to Broughton Hall in Roselle. The weather was overcast, and the grey sky matched the gloominess of my thoughts. Dr. Norwood had sedated her for the journey, which we took by taxi, not willing to risk any outbursts on the tram. She slept most of the time, her head resting on my shoulder. Each time Uncle Ota looked at her, his eyes clouded over, as if he were remembering something painful. With my impressions of the asylum in Prague, I had been afraid of what the clinic might look like. But there was nothing frightening, at least on the surface, about Broughton Hall, except its proximity to Callan Park Mental Hospital, where the certified cases were sent. The grounds we passed through on our way to the admissions office were picturesque, with flower beds and ponds. Palms and pine trees shaded the road, while the rolling lawns were dotted with peacocks pecking at the grass. A nurse in a white apron greeted us on the stairs of the converted Georgian mansion that now served as the admissions building. "Good morning," she said to us. She nodded to an attendant who pushed a wheelchair towards us and held it while Uncle Ota helped Clara into it. Inside the admissions office, Uncle Ota filled in the paperwork for Clara. "I'm sorry," said Clara, clinging to my arm. It dismayed me to see her looking so lost. I stroked her hair. "You have nothing to be sorry about. It is not your fault." Although Dr. Norwood had described Clara's behaviour as psychosis, she was admitted to the clinic as suffering from melancholia brought on by shock. This meant she would not be restrained and would be free to wander the grounds in the company of a nurse. "You are to visit her only once a week, on the supervising doctor's orders," the admissions nurse told us, "with the first visit not to take place within a fortnight of today." "Why?" I asked, upset that Clara was being kept from us. The nurse's mouth twitched in a way that suggested she did not like to be questioned. "Many patients remain ill as long as they have their family to show them sympathy. With the family removed, they often decide to cure themselves." With the paperwork done, the time came for Clara to be weighed and put into bed. Watching her being led away from us was like having my heart torn into pieces. Before she passed through the ward door, she turned to us. The vague look left her face and she smiled. "I will get better as quickly as I can," she said. "I love you." For a moment, Clara was herself again. It was like catching a glimpse of the sun on a cloudy day. My spirits lifted. But the moment was lost with the sound of jangling keys and the turn of a lock, and my sister disappearing from view. Uncle Ota and I returned to Broughton Hall a fortnight later. this time with Ranjana, full of hope to see Clara recovered. But when the nurse brought her out to the visiting room, her hair was flat and dull, and her skin was grey. I remembered the way Clara had always glided into rooms, her poise commanding attention. But that day the best she could do was to shuffle in and collapse into a chair. I knelt beside Clara, and she kissed my cheek, but it was a reflex action rather than a loving gesture. Her hands trembled like an old woman's. On the second visit, I went alone, as Ranjana and Uncle Ota had to work, and Esther was looking after Thomas. Clara was no better than she had been the previous week. She barely recognized me. "Where is the doctor in charge?" I asked the ward nurse, a thin girl with sinewy limbs. "Dr. Jones is doing the rounds this morning," she said. "He comes to the women's ward in the afternoons." "I want to see him now," I told her. "I want to know why my sister is not any better." "He is not your sister's doctor," the nurse told me. "She is being looked after by Dr. Page. He is in the men's convalescent ward at the moment." "Is he a senior doctor?" I asked. "No," said the ward nurse. "He is a junior medical officer. But he's very good. In fact, he is the—" I did not wait to hear the rest of her sentence. I rushed through the hall and into the reception room. The admissions nurse called after me when I hurried by her in the direction of the men's convalescent ward, but I ignored her. My blood was on fire. A junior medical officer indeed. My sister was seriously ill. She needed to be treated by someone with experience. There were no locks in the convalescent wards, and I burst through the swing doors before stopping in my tracks. The curtains had been drawn around some of the beds, but they did not reach all the way to the floor. Dozens of white, hairy bottoms squatting over bedpans shone back at me. The sulphurous smell mixed with scents of chlorine and pine oil knocked the charge out of my stampede. "Can I help you?" I averted my gaze from the male backsides and saw that the voice came from a doctor in a white coat at the far end of the ward. He was standing with a nurse by the bed of a patient. The colour rushed to my cheeks. "Are you Dr. Page?" I asked, trying to hide my embarrassment with a veil of superiority. The doctor handed the nurse the patient's chart and instructed her to give him a warm bath, then walked towards me. "Yes, I am," he said. As he drew closer, I realized how young he looked. His jaw and his cheekbones were masculine, but his hair was a rich chestnut color, and his complexion was what would have been called peaches and cream in a woman. "I am Miss Rose, Miss Rose's sister," I said, blushing again when I realized how foolish my self-introduction sounded. "Why are you treating my sister instead of Dr. Jones?" Dr. Page, undeterred by my abrupt manner, smiled, and his dimples showed. "I had some experience with shell-shocked patients in the war," he said. "He thought I would be the best person to treat her." The war? With his slim neck and rosy cheeks, Dr. Page looked too young to be out of school. But I realized that to have finished his medical training, he would have to be at least 8 years older than me. "Why is she so lethargic?" I asked. Dr. Page's face turned serious, and he guided me to the door. "If you will come to my office, I can explain your sister's treatment to you." I followed him down a corridor and into a room that was the size of a cupboard. The folders on the bookshelves were neatly arranged, and the desk held only a telephone, writing pad, and a glazed Chinese figurine. But between the cupboards and the visitor's chair, there was barely room to spread out my elbows. It seemed that junior doctors did not command large offices at Broughton Hall. Dr. Page offered me a chair, then squeezed behind his desk. The figurine was of a Chinaman sitting on a rock and fishing. His smile was lopsided, and the glaze of his hat had run down one cheek. He looked like he was weeping. "Tea?" Dr. Page asked me. I nodded. A warm drink was exactly what I needed. The smell of bowel matter still lingered with me, and I had a taste of metal in my mouth. Dr. Page picked up the telephone and seemed to have trouble persuading the person on the line to bring some hot water. He succeeded, however, and a few minutes later an orderly appeared with a tray of cups and a pot of tea, and he squeezed past me to put the things on the desk. Had I not been so worried about Clara, the clatter of crockery in the tiny room and the man with burly arms handing me a delicate china cup might have been comical. The orderly left, and Dr. Page turned his attention to me. "The standard treatment with any patient brought into care with hysteria is to sedate them," he said, donning a pair of spectacles and pulling out a file. "They lose their appetite and become lethargic. I am reducing your sister's medication, but I have to do it gradually. While she is sedated, she cannot explain to me what caused her to have an attack, and until I know that, I cannot help her." Dr. Page glanced at me. His blue eyes were even bluer behind the glasses. "I see here that you and your sister are from Prague. My father went to Bohemia on his grand tour and speaks highly of it. How is it that you came to Australia?" I realized Dr. Page was questioning me. He would need to know, wouldn't he? Someone would have to tell him about Mother's death and about our leaving Prague. I had never imagined mentioning those things to anyone outside the family. Who was Dr. Page? And could I trust him? He must have sensed my discomfort, because he did not push me further on the matter. Instead, he glanced back to his file. "Once your sister regains her stamina, I will get her involved in activities, and you will start to see progress then. I believe she plays the piano." "Clara is exceptionally talented," I told him. "She has mastered pieces that most girls her age could not tackle." Dr. Page smiled, and his dimples appeared again. He made a note of what I said in the file. His hands were slim and neat. I became aware that one of my nails was broken and hid it by placing one hand on top of the other in my lap. Mother had been so particular about grooming, and I was becoming careless. "What a marvelous talent to have," he said. "I wish I had some sort of musical ability. But my father says I sing like a foghorn." Despite the anxiety I was feeling, I could not help laughing at the image. "Surely your singing is not that bad," I said. "I don't think so either," he said, with a mischievous grin. I found myself blushing. I had stormed into the men's ward, ready to attack Dr. Page, and now I was charmed by him. His calm, thoughtful manner had won me over. What did it matter that he was young? He was obviously the sort of doctor who cared about his patients. He glanced at his watch. "I'm sorry, but I will have to get back to my ward duty. However, do make an appointment with me with the admissions nurse. I would like to speak to you further about your sister." I rose from my chair, and Dr. Page inched past me to open the door. "Your sister will be having her nap now. Why don't you come back tomorrow?" "Tomorrow?" I exclaimed. "But the nurse said I could only come once a week." "Good gracious, no," said Dr. Page, walking out into the corridor with me. "Come every day if you wish. It will do your sister good. I only try to keep away relatives who are part of my patients' problems." On our way to the reception area, we passed a nurse assisting a male patient back to the ward. The man's haggard face transformed when he saw Dr. Page. The nurse tells me that when I've put on a few more pounds, you're going to let me play cricket with the other patients." "My word, Mr. Cameron," Dr. Page said, patting the man's back. "And I should very much like to watch the match." I bade Dr. Page farewell and walked out of the grounds through the tall gates into the bustling street. I turned back to look at Broughton Hall. I had entered these gates feeling desperate for Clara. Now Dr. Page had given me a glimmer of hope. Although my conversation with Dr. Page gave me a brighter outlook regarding Clara's recovery, the healing was slow, and the months that she was in Broughton Hall were lonely for me. I had not realized until her absence that in all we experienced in fleeing Prague and coming to Australia, Clara had transformed from my charge into my best friend. But perhaps I had confided in her too much. To find relief from my pain, I went to Mr. Tilley's cinema in the mornings before visiting Clara. Mr. Tilley gave me free tickets and asked the usherettes to keep an eye out so that I would not be bothered by men. He did not know Clara was in Broughton Hall. He thought that she had glandular fever. "Give my best to her," he told me. "We miss her playing here on Saturday nights." When the lights lowered and other worlds flashed on the screen, I had some reprieve from my worries. Afterwards, I would eat a sandwich in the foyer cafe and watch the people coming and going from the cinema. My other favorite distraction was the vegetarian cafe on George Street in the city. When I felt the need for something different after the cinema, I went there. Australians were as carnivorous as Czechs. Mutton, bacon, and beef were the staples of their diet. Vegetarianism was a belief on the fringe of society. Uncle Ota commented that while it was not considered bizarre to pass a butcher and see men in aprons up to their elbows in blood and intestines, or to view the gory display of body parts in the windows, to announce oneself as a vegetarian is to defy the belief that man was designated by God to have dominion over animals. Because of the subversive nature of vegetarianism, the cafe attracted an interesting mix of people. Artists, philosophers, actors, dancers, and athletes. There were many charity workers and socialists too. The charity workers argued that the meat industry debased the working class by forcing men to perform brutalizing work, while the socialists believed more people could be fed better quality food if land was used to cultivate crops instead of producing meat. I would peer over the rim of my cup of chicory coffee and build theories about the people around me. One of these was a beautiful artist's model whose skin was like ivory satin, even though she must have been close to 70 years old. Imelda, I named her in my imagination because of her exotic taste in clothes, and made up a story in which she was wondering if she would take another lover or travel to Italy this year. I had just seen Fritz Lang's De Müde Tod, so my head was full of the glamorous locations like Venice and China. I created histories for the young women sharing recipes and the groups of men studying together. But there was one man whose past I was afraid to touch. Although he did not wear a military uniform or a badge, I could guess from his age how he had lost his leg. I often saw him there in the corner booth, his trouser leg pinned to his thigh and his face twisted into a scowl. Occasionally he was joined by a skinny man with ruddy cheeks who wore a cap and scarf, even when the weather was warm. On these occasions it was the skinny man who made conversation, while his friend nodded or grunted. Most of the time, the man's companion was a cockatoo with a dropped wing that sat on his shoulder and bobbed up and down whenever he fed him a piece of apple. In those moments, the man's face softened and he would scratch the bird under its chin. They were a poignant couple. One could not fly, and one could not walk. One day I arrived at the cafe before the young man. I was finishing my salad when the door swung open, and I looked up to see him maneuvering himself over the step with a crutch to support his leg. I had never seen him move before and was surprised that he also carried a wooden tripod under the same arm that held the crutch. A camera bag, much larger than the one I used, was slung over one of his shoulders, while the cockatoo perched on the other. The man was so burdened under his load that I wanted to help him by either holding open the door or pulling out a chair for him. From the way some of the customers glanced up when he hobbled past them, I wondered if they were thinking the same thing. But nobody moved. There was something in the man's eyes that forbade help. When he reached the booth, he sank into the chair and grimaced, as though trying to hide the exhaustion his efforts had cost him. I could not help staring when he slipped his crutch under the table and laid the tripod next to it. My fascination was with his camera case. He swung it onto the table and clicked the locks open. When he took out a Pathé moving picture camera, my heart jolted. Ever since my interest in making films had been piqued, I'd been studying camera catalogues, and I recognized the model. It was the same camera that Billy Bitzer used, the cameraman who had created films with D.W. Griffith. From that, and the way the man checked the adjustments and cleaned the lens, I deduced he was not an amateur. I was so absorbed in my observations that I did not notice the pair of eyes that were studying me with interest. "Hello, pretty? Give me a nut," the cockatoo squawked, bobbing its head in my direction. I turned away but was not fast enough to avoid catching the man's eye. He held my gaze but did not smile. "He is a beautiful bird," I said, embarrassment raising the pitch of my voice. The man did not answer. I was sure he thought I had been staring at him because of his leg. I glanced at my watch and did some play acting of someone who has realized they are late to be somewhere else. Although the man returned to the task of checking his camera, I felt his eyes on me when I gathered my purse and jacket. My hands shook when I rummaged for the money to pay the waiter. "That poor man," another customer whispered to me when I approached the door. "I don't think he could hear you." I nodded to her, but I was sure she had interpreted the man's reaction incorrectly. He had heard me. At the moment our eyes met, he had flinched. And in his tortured expression, I had seen a mirror of what I was feeling. We were kindred spirits. Two people trying to fend off despair. I visited Clara the following day and was delighted to find her not in bed, but waiting for me in the visiting room. She was wearing a dress instead of a hospital gown. The nurses had cut her hair to make it easier to manage, but Clara had softened the severity of the style by wearing it swept to the side and held in place with a silver clip. "It's good to see you," I said. I took her hand and admired the piece of embroidery she had been working on while waiting for me. Clara smiled, and I was pleased to see the color in her cheeks and lips again. "I hoped I might find you both here," said Dr. Page, striding into the room. He held a package wrapped in brown paper under his arm. "I found this treasure today," he said, sitting down beside me and placing the package on the table in front of Clara. "But I have to leave directly from here this afternoon to go to a conference, and I need someone who can mind it for me until tomorrow evening." Dr. Page indicated to Clara that she should open the package. She untied the string and unraveled the paper to reveal a Chinese figurine. This one was a bearded man with a calligraphy brush. The hands and feet were the natural flesh color of the mud from which the figurine had been made. The model was not especially artistic or well crafted, but something about his raised eyebrows made me laugh. Or perhaps it was the tongue-in-cheek way Dr. Page spoke about it, as if he were entrusting us with an antique from the Tang dynasty. "What sort of figurine is this?" I asked him. "A mudman," answered Dr. Page. "The Chinese use them in their bonsai scenes." "Do you collect them?" asked Clara. "Oh, yes," said Dr. Page, rolling his eyes in mock seriousness. "This is my 200th mudman. Each one is unique." Clara's face lit up with amusement. "We shall guard him with our lives," she said. The ward nurse passed by with her trolley of medicines and sent an admiring glance in Dr. Page's direction. I could understand her attraction. He was not a classically handsome man, but in his crisp white coat and with his smooth skin and reddish-brown hair, he was dashing. "Well, I'd better be off," he said, rising from his chair. We wished him the best for his conference. After he had left, Clara passed the figurine to me. "You had better take it," she said. "If I put it on my bedside table, the night nurse will break it. She breaks at least one glass a night and then runs around with a brush and pan making a terrible commotion." The following day, I returned with the figurine. I also brought my camera. "Can I take some pictures of my sister in the grounds?" I asked the admissions nurse. It was the woman who had told us we could only visit Clara once a week, and I could tell from the way she pursed her lips she was not pleased that Dr. Page had been lenient with me. "I hope you know that your request to come every day earned Dr. Page a talking to from the superintendent," she said. So visiting only once a week was a policy of the clinic. I could have told her that I had not asked to come every day. Dr. Page had suggested that himself. But I thought it best to look contrite. The nurse slapped the signature book on the desk. I took it as a sign that she had granted me permission. "Don't be more than 10 minutes," she warned me. I took pictures of Clara in the rose garden. The weather was sunny, and the flowers had come into full bloom. "Let's take some pictures of Dr. Page's figurine," Clara said, setting the mudman among the ferns and rocks. I was pleased to see her taking an interest in life again. "I hope the photograph cheers Dr. Page up," she said, positioning her face behind the figurine so that through the lens the little man looked as if he were about to be devoured by a giant. "Why does he need to be cheered up?" A shadow fell over Clara's face. "The nurses talk about him," she said. "They say he is madly in love with his fiancée, but she keeps delaying the wedding date." "Clara, that's gossip," I told her. "Don't get involved in gossip." The admissions nurse opened a window and bellowed that we had been half an hour instead of 10 minutes, and visiting time was now at an end. "I'll bring the photographs soon," I told Clara, rushing back with her towards the clinic. On the way home, I found myself thinking about Dr. Page. So he had a fiancée. I had scolded Clara for gossiping about her doctor, and yet I was curious about him too. I did not have much experience with men, apart from a boy I had admired at an afternoon tea in Prague, but I could not imagine keeping Dr. Page hanging on a string. His fiancée must be very beautiful and very sure of herself, I thought. When I arrived for my visit some days later, Clara was beaming. "I showed Dr. Page the pictures of his mudman, and he laughed so much I thought he would never stop," she said. "He asked me all about you." I placed the bunch of daisies I had picked for her in her lap. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "The truth," she grinned, "that you are wonderful and clever, but rather shy." I wondered if Dr. Page had been asking questions about me as part of his analysis of Clara. "What did he say to that?" "He laughed even harder," said Clara. I don't know why. I thought of the way I had burst into the men's ward a few weeks ago, demanding to know why Dr. Page, instead of a senior doctor, was treating my sister. No wonder he had thought Clara's description of me as shy was funny. When she could, Ranjana changed her shifts so she could come to see Clara with me, while Esther minded Thomas. Uncle Ota came on his days off. He was with me the next time I saw Dr. Page, which was our first encounter since he had given Clara the mudman to look after. I was pleased to find him sitting in the garden talking to her. He stood up to greet us and made inquiries as to our well-being, but he was not himself. There were circles under his eyes, and the roses in his cheeks had faded. His eyes met mine, then he looked away. "You will have to excuse me," he said. "I'd better get started on the afternoon rounds." "He's a nice young man," remarked Uncle Ota, watching Dr. Page make his way up the steps to the clinic. Clara's smile waned. "He's out of sorts," she said. "He and 2 orderlies took some soon-to-be-released patients out on a harbour cruise yesterday to celebrate their recovery. It was a happy outing until they were on their way back. A young woman jumped off the boat and drowned herself." I shuddered. If Dr. Page lost a patient, he would feel it. "He must be devastated," I said. I was pleased with Clara's progress under Dr. Page's care, but I had not yet made an appointment with him, as I had promised. I did not have the courage to tell him, or anyone else, what had happened to us. But the tragic incident with his patient prompted him to seek me. We sat down together in his office. "Miss Rose, I hope to discharge your sister soon. I believe she turns 13 on the 29th of September. I'd like to send her home on her birthday." My heart leapt at the news. Clara coming home? I could hardly believe it. Dr. Page sent me a serious glance. "But before I have her discharged, I want to make sure that I have treated the true nature of her trauma. I lost a patient this week who I thought was cured. I won't let that happen to your sister." His statement made me realize the gravity of the matter. My stomach tightened. "The patient who died was admitted because she supposedly had a phobia of spiders," he continued. "It's a fairly straightforward fear to address, and I consulted with the doctors here and a specialist in England. After a few weeks, the patient showed remarkable improvement. I was even able to take her through the grounds and encourage her to stand close to spiderwebs without any sign of fear. What we failed to realize was that what she really feared was not spiders, but the world outside. She lived in a cocoon here, safe and quiet. She could not imagine returning to that frightening world again." I pressed my face into my hands. I had thought when I came to Australia that I could put my life in Prague aside. I had anticipated that Clara and I would live in another dimension until she reached 21. I missed Aunt Josephine and Fripp terribly, but I would not allow myself to feel it. Although I could never forget Mother, I forced myself to almost disregard that she had been murdered. It was as if I expected that she would be waiting for us when Clara and I returned. But things had not happened as I had planned. Clara had become sick, and it seemed that if I did not cooperate with Dr. Page, she might not recover. I swallowed. "Dr. Page, our mother was murdered by our stepfather. That is why Clara and I came to Australia." Whatever Dr. Page had been expecting, he was not prepared for anything quite so dramatic. "I see," he said, frowning. "Please tell me what happened." It took me a few minutes to gather my strength, but once I began speaking, I could not stop. I told Dr. Page about Milos and about the assassin. I even told him about Aunt Emily, and the thought that Clara might harm herself made me choke back a sob. "Clara never told me any of this," said Dr. Page. "I thought she might be a perfectionist. Very sensitive people and artists often drive themselves to breaking point, striving for excellence." I felt tears rise up in my eyes. "Dr. Page, do you think she will get better?" "I don't think your sister is insane," he said. "The situation that you've described would break anyone. During the war, I treated strong men who came back from the battlefield shattered. From what you've told me, I'm surprised that you haven't fallen ill yourself. I only wish that your sister had confided all of this to me earlier. I could have helped her sooner." I had never heard a doctor speak so thoughtfully. I could not imagine Dr. Socek or another doctor saying he had sympathy for us, even if he felt it. Doctors told you what to do, and you did it. I realized that I had built a shell around me, and Dr. Page was making cracks in it, gently and painstakingly. I dabbed at my face with my handkerchief, trying to control the tears running down my cheeks. "We couldn't," I said. "We were afraid. We could not confide in anybody." Dr. Page sat back, lost in thought for a few moments. "Is there no way your mother's killer can be brought to justice?" he asked. My handkerchief was so damp that it was useless. Dr. Page reached into his pocket and passed me his own. I explained to him the difficulties of the case and the lack of evidence. "I'm glad that you've told me what you have," he said. "I lost my mother in a fire when I was 10 years old. It's a terrible burden to carry alone. I feel very much for Clara and for you." I was too moved to speak. I stared at the Irish linen handkerchief in my hand and wondered if Dr. Page's fiancée had given it to him. If she did not value Dr. Page, she was a foolish woman. He was so kind, and when you had been through all Clara and I had, kindness was what you most appreciated in people. Chapter 9. Although Broughton Hall was not as expensive as an exclusive clinic, Clara's treatment had drained our funds. She was excited about starting at the Conservatorium High School in the new year. How could I tell her I no longer had the money for her tuition? "I wonder if I could find work in an office," I said to Uncle Otto one day when he was reading the paper in the parlor. "I know how to type." Uncle Otto glanced at me. "That would bore you, Adelka. You're a daydreamer. Not that it is a bad habit, if you are creative. Besides, the Czech and English keyboards are not the same." "I could adapt," I said. He gave me a smile. "Why don't you do some work with your camera? You take exceptional portraits." "That will take a long time to set up," I told him. "I'd need film, a better camera, developing chemicals, and I'd have to find clients. The tutor's fees are due by the end of the year, otherwise Clara will lose her place with the teachers she wants." Uncle Otto thought for a moment before answering. "Studios need ladies to take passport photographs, or colorists to do touch-ups. That will bring money in, and you will meet clients that way. You can use my camera for the portraits." My spirits rallied with Uncle Otto's suggestion. Despite all the terrible things that had happened, I was glad to be living with him. Uncle Otto did not look anything like my father physically, but he resembled him in his generosity. He was right, too. I would not be good at administration tasks because my mind was always wandering. I excused myself to cook lunch. On my way to the kitchen, Esther called to me. "Adela, could you come here for a moment?" She was standing in the doorway to the downstairs sitting room, wringing her hands nervously. She was still an anxious and quiet person, but not so much of a mouse. The other evening we had gone to see the Golem, which was set in Prague. On our way home I was praising the film when Esther surprised us all by blurting out that she thought the film was pretentious. Although her opinion conflicted with mine, I was glad she had spoken up. But she still wore drab clothes that made her look much older than her age. I thought of the man with the cockatoo at the vegetarian cafe. War left some scars that could not be erased. I followed Esther into the sitting room, which was much cheerier than when Mrs. Bain had occupied it. Esther had replaced the heavy furniture with comfortable armchairs and installed light shades with beaded trims. A watercolour of the beach decorated the far wall. The burled walnut piano with its lyre detailing and French legs was the only reminder of her mother's taste. "What do you think of the piano?" Esther asked me. "It does stand out now that you've changed the room," I said, "but the most important thing is how it sounds." "Would you play it for me?" she asked, opening the fallboard and adjusting the stool. "I never learned. Mother said I wouldn't be brilliant, so it was no use trying." I had not touched the piano since I was 14 years old. With a virtuoso in the house, there had been little point. Still, I sat down and played a few bars of Sinding's Rustle of Spring, which had been a favourite with Mother. I was surprised that the piano was in tune. The sound it produced was beautiful, despite my amateurish musicianship. Clara's Petrov Grand had a better tone, though. Esther agreed. "This old Steinway doesn't bring me any happy memories. I've decided to sell it, to pay for Clara's tuition." I was stunned. That Esther would sell the piano did not surprise me, as she had sold or given away most of her mother's furniture, but to make such a generous offer. "What else should I do with it?" she said in reply to my babbled refusal. "I have no family. It would give me pleasure to see a lovely girl get the chance she deserves." Later that day I approached Esther where she was sitting in the garden and working on a tapestry. The garden was exquisite now that I had pulled out the weeds and planted borders of native flowers and urns of lavender, geraniums, and verbena. "Esther, I want to thank you for your kindness," I said, sitting down next to her. "If there is a way to pay you back, I will find it." She lowered her eyes. "It's not necessary," she said. "You and your sister were kind to me." A blue butterfly with black trimmed wings settled on her sleeve. "If Clara hadn't told me that butterflies only live a few weeks, I would swear that one is following you," I laughed. Esther stared at me. "Butterfly?" "The one on your sleeve," I said. "The blue and black one. I've seen one like that around you several times." She held up both her sleeves. "Where?" she asked, squinting. The butterfly was resting on her elbow in plain view. Was Esther short-sighted? "There," I said. "It's on your shoulder now." She shook her head. Tears filled her eyes. "I never see it," she wept. "I never see it." The butterfly took off towards the sunshine. I put my hand on her wrist. "Esther, I'm sorry. It's only a butterfly." Tears stained her face. "He told me that if anything happened, he would come back to me as a butterfly. But I never see it." The air shimmered with a sense of the unreal. "Your fiancé?" Esther nodded. "He knew that I loved butterflies. He said he would communicate to me that way. Mother's doctor often saw the butterfly, and the funeral director who buried her noticed it resting on my shoulder when I stood by her grave. I wonder why, if he is trying to communicate with you, you can't see him, I said. Esther looked at me. The milkman even saw him in human form, standing by the garden gate in his military uniform. I remembered the man with innocent eyes I had seen when we first moved into Esther's house. In Prague, ghosts had often appeared when we made changes to the house. Perhaps Esther's fiancé wanted to see who we were and to make sure we treated Esther well. "Tell me about him," I ventured. I was relieved when her tears dried and a smile came to her face. In that instant, I had a sense of what she had been like as a young girl, before the war had torn the man she loved from her. "His name was Louis," she said. "Like Louis XIV of France," he would say when introducing himself. "The monarch who never washed." Esther laughed. "He wasn't like that, of course. He was fastidiously clean." Her smile faded, and a troubled look came to her face. "Awful to think of him dying in all that mud." "France?" She nodded, and we fell into silence, listening to the finches twittering in the jacaranda tree. They were not native birds, those little finches. They were from Europe. They were the birds the soldiers in the trenches must have heard in moments of ceasefire, or when they lay dying. "When the war came, he told me he had to go," Esther said, a faraway look in her eyes. "The regiment looked dashing in their uniforms when they marched down the street. Your mum may not approve of me now, but she'll think differently when I come back a hero," he said to me. "They say he died a hero's death. But death is still death, isn't it? Hero or not." I understood Esther's wraith-like existence better now. She had lost hope. Her life had stopped the day she had received the news of Louis's death, just like Mother had stopped the hands on the tall clock the morning she had learned Father was dead. Esther told me stories about Louis, the way he used to talk to dogs as if they were his friends, the way he never shut a door completely, but always left a gap open. "Curtains, too," she said with a fond smile. "He couldn't bring himself to close anything. The cork was never quite in the water bottle, the flour jar never screwed shut, so an unsuspecting person would pick it up and find themselves dusted in powder." Esther was telling me things that had been bottled up inside because she'd had no one to listen to her grief. When Ranjana called out from the house that she was leaving for work and Thomas was asleep, I slipped my arm through Esther's. To my surprise, she took mine and squeezed it. I sensed that she had unburdened herself. I hoped so, at least. A few days later, I travelled to the city to visit photographic studios and ask for work. Some studio managers were friendly but had no work. Others had work but were unfriendly the moment they heard the traces of my foreign accent. I wanted to take pictures for my living. My clothes were becoming worn and were not fashionable in Sydney. Clara was coming home in a fortnight, and I hoped to buy new dresses for us to wear for the family party we had planned for her birthday. I had a vision of having my hair bobbed and donning a new pair of beaded shoes. I enjoyed the bohemian life I lived with Uncle Orta and Ranjana, but I had inherited Mother's love of beautiful things. On my way down George Street, I passed the vegetarian cafe and stopped for an orange juice. I felt at home with the aroma of vegetable soup and the clatter of opinions echoing around the room. The cafe was crowded with familiar faces. I looked for the man with the cockatoo among them, but he was not there. The waitress brought my juice, and I flipped through the newspaper. My eyes fell on an advertisement. Madame d'Iblis, spiritualist. Everyone's grandmother was a spiritualist in Prague, but the practice had grown in popularity in Australia after the war. So many people had lost loved ones and lost them young. Arthur Conan Doyle had just completed a lecture tour. He was known as the writer of the Sherlock Holmes mysteries, but after his son, brothers-in-law and nephew were killed in the war, he became an exponent of spiritualism. I had seen many ghosts in my life, but never made contact with them. I thought it irreverent to call souls back into the world after they had departed it. I was an observer of spirits rather than a medium. I thought about Esther and her butterfly. After she had told me about Louis, we had decided that the next time I saw the butterfly, I would photograph it. The following day, when I returned home from visiting Clara, Esther was in the garden planting tulips. One look at my face stopped her short. "It's on me, isn't it?" she had said. I nodded. The butterfly was on her forearm. "Hold still," I told her. I rushed into the house to get my camera. There was no film in it. I searched my cupboard for a pack. I found one and loaded it. I thought the butterfly would have disappeared by the time I returned outside, but it was still there. I pressed the shutter. I wanted to take another picture, but before I could, the butterfly flew away. "I'll develop it now," I told Esther. I watched with bated breath as the image came to life. Esther's shape, her face, her arm. There was no butterfly. Perhaps Madame d'Iblis could help Esther see Louis. I imagined Esther would not have the courage to go to a spiritualist on her own, so decided to go with her. It would be a way of thanking her for her generosity to Clara. Madame d'Iblis instructed us to come in the afternoon. I did not tell Ranjana or Uncle Otto where we were headed. They were superstitious in many ways, but they were also convinced that spiritualists were charlatans who took advantage of people. I told them that Esther and I were going to an exhibition at the Art Gallery of New South Wales. I did not like being deceitful with Uncle Otto and Ranjana, but I convinced myself that it was for the greater good. Even if my aunt and uncle had consented to my going to Madame d'Iblis's house with Esther, they would not have approved of the location. The medium lived in an unsavoury part of Sydney. Esther and I walked close together through the dingy streets of Darlinghurst, clutching our purses to our chests, steeling ourselves against the stink of urine that wafted up from the drains. I eyed the weather-stained walls of what had once been mansions, now subdivided into apartments. The remnants of a more genteel time lingered in the wrought iron railings and the palm trees that shaded some of the gardens. Every so often we passed a lion's head fountain or a statue of the Venus de Milo, incongruous with the newspaper-lined windows. Madame d'Iblis's apartment was on the second floor of a terrace in Forbes Street. We climbed the stairs, blocking our noses to the stench of damp. We jumped when we saw a man lying on the landing, his head thrown back and his mouth open. At first we thought he was dead, but then we heard his snoring and saw the beer bottle clasped in his hand. We slipped around him and continued down a corridor that reeked of onions. A woman's voice burst out from behind one of the closed doors. "Lay off him, I tell you! Lay off him!" We hurried down the hall towards Madame d'Iblis's apartment, which was the last door on the left. I rapped on the splintered wood. Footsteps approached, and we heard the clicks of several locks being turned. The door swung open, and a trace of sandalwood temporarily masked the unsavoury smell of the hallway. We found ourselves facing a woman with her grey hair tucked into a scarf. The pendant she wore around her neck disappeared down her cleavage when she leaned forward to see who we were. We introduced ourselves, and Madame Diblis held a finger to her lips. "We must talk quietly," she said. "The spirits are restless today." We followed her into the parlor. The furniture was draped in velvet fabrics and lace doilies. In the center of the room stood a marble dining table surrounded by high-backed chairs. By the window hung a mirror bracketed by curves and florets. It was the type of mirror I imagined the Dark Queen in Snow White gazing into when she asked her famous question, "Mirror, mirror on the wall." "Please, sit down," said Madame Diblis, indicating a sofa covered in cushions. She listened to our story about the butterfly and Louis's promise. When I told her that I could see the butterfly, while Esther could not, the medium turned to me and studied my face before sitting back and staring at her hands thoughtfully. "It is 5 years since your fiancé died," Madame Diblis said to Esther. "It is easier to call back those who have recently passed to the other side, but with all the activity today, we may have some luck. My feeling is, however, that because he is trying to reach you in the way he promised, he may not be able to speak, but we will try." I tried to ascertain if Madame Diblis was a fraud. I thought of the tricks false mediums used that Uncle Ota had told me about, using strings to move objects and ring bells, but could not see anything odd in the room or around the marble table, which was where I assumed she would work. Madame Diblis's apartment was more pleasant than the others around it, but there was nothing to suggest she was making a lot of money. The gold ring with the red garnet she wore was beautiful, but not expensive. She had an exotic accent that I could not place, although that could have been affected. Madame Diblis turned to me as if she had read my thoughts. "It's important that you are a believer," she said. "If you bring doubts to the séance, you will keep the spirits away. We must have unity of purpose." I decided that she was genuine. Esther and I took our places at the table while Madame Diblis closed the curtains. She then lit the candelabra. From a cabinet she brought out a handbell, a maraca, a notepad and pencil, and placed them on the table, explaining that spirits used different tools to communicate. I glanced at Esther, whose face was as white as a sheet. I was sure with her religious upbringing, Esther had never imagined she would be taking part in a séance. I felt uneasy myself. If Louis appeared, I would not be afraid. But an upsetting thought had been bothering me. What if I disturbed Mother or Father? I closed my eyes and prayed for them to remain at rest. They had both died in terrible circumstances. I wanted them to be at peace. "We will hold hands to create an unbroken circle of power," Madame Diblis said. "Uninvited spirits can come through the door I opened to the other world. Sometimes they come because they wish to do harm. It is important, then, that you keep holding on to me and to each other, no matter who arrives to speak." I shivered when Madame Diblis blew out the candles, and we sat in the darkness with no light coming through the curtains. Madame Diblis began an incantation in Latin. After a while she said in English, "Spirits, come forth if you are willing. Is there anyone who wishes to speak to Esther?" My legs became heavy and my head drooped. I thought I was on the verge of dozing off, but then my arms became leaden, and it was difficult to continue to hold on to Esther and Madame Diblis. "Who is there?" asked Madame Diblis. The chill in the room bit at my skin and I shuddered. "Who is there?" Madame de Bliss asked again. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. I became aware of somebody leaning over me. I wanted to turn and see if it was a trick performed by an accomplice of Madame de Bliss, but I could not move. A hand touched my shoulder. "Miss Rose," whispered Madame de Bliss, "there is a presence near you. They wish to tell you something." I tried to grip harder onto Esther and Madame de Bliss, but I could no longer feel them. I heard piano music. It was a piece I recognized, for Clara played it often. Bach's Prelude No. 22 in B-flat minor. Pictures whirled around my mind of places and people I had never seen. Young girls in lacy white dresses. A fluffy dog. A river. I found myself before our country house in Doxey. Its white walls and red roof stood out against the sky, and the enormous beech and oak trees that surrounded it. The scent of pines tickled my nostrils. It was summer, and the shutters were open to the breeze. I walked through the doorway and into the house, shivering when I left the sunshine for the shade. There was a staircase in the foyer. The stone was worn at the center from years of occupants making their way up and down the steps. I floated up the stairs towards a room decorated with olive and cream furniture. A young woman was sitting by a piano. She wore a gold dress with a white collar and banana-shaped sleeves. Around her neck dangled a filigree medallion with a center of blue crystal. At first I thought it was Clara because of the dark hair and the slim figure. But the woman looked up, and I knew it was not my sister. It was Emily. "Ota," she said, tears of joy filling her eyes. "My darling Ota, I'll wait for you until the end of time." Blackness covered my vision. Pain seared through my shoulder. Hands touched my face. I felt a towel being pressed to my forehead. Esther's voice was close by my ear. "Wake up, Adela." Gradually I came to, and I saw Esther and Madame de Bliss crouched over me. The curtains were open, and the afternoon light poured into the room. "You are too open," Madame de Bliss scolded me. "You did not tell me that you had the gift too. You can't go channeling spirits unless you know how to guide them." "I see them," I told her, "but they usually don't speak to me." "You come back to me and I will teach you how to communicate with the afterworld properly," she said. "It is a dangerous gift if you don't know how to use it." Esther and Madame de Bliss helped me to sit up and then lifted me to a standing position. I felt like a newborn calf with my weak legs splaying in all directions. "That spirit came from a long time in the past," Madame de Bliss said, while Esther smoothed down my hair and handed me my purse. "She had to draw a lot of power from you to speak. She wanted to tell someone that she still thinks of them." My head ached so much I thought it was going to explode. Esther tugged at her hat, and I noticed the butterfly brooch on the rim. "Louis didn't appear?" I asked. "No," said Madame de Bliss. "Come back next week, and we will try again." Out in the dirty street, prostitutes and pimps stared at us. Esther's shoulders heaved. She was crying. "Esther?" She shook her head and dabbed her eyes with her gloves. "Let's go to our tea house," I suggested. "We could both do with a warm drink." We sat in the tea house in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. I could see from her pinched mouth that Esther was disappointed she had not been able to speak with Louis. I felt terrible and did not know what to say. My mind drifted to Aunt Emily. Ota," she had said. "My darling Ota." There had been longing in her eyes. Mother had said that Aunt Emily went insane after an affair with a scoundrel. I calculated dates in my head. Uncle Ota had started his odyssey the year of Emily's death. Was my kind, generous uncle the villain my mother had mentioned? Was that the falling out she had talked about before her death? I could not imagine Uncle Ota being anything other than a gentleman. But I knew that I would not be able to see him in exactly the same way until I found out for sure. Chapter 10. As promised, Dr. Page discharged Clara from Broughton Hall on her birthday. Uncle Ota, Ranjana and I arrived in the morning to pick her up. I did not have enough money for a new dress for both of us, so I had bought Clara a periwinkle frock with a plissé frill at the neck, and had smartened a dress I had by adding a sash and dyeing my shoes pink to match. Ranjana and Uncle Ota waited in the reception room while I helped Clara into her new clothes in her ward. My fingers trembled from the excitement that she was coming home. "Here we are," I said, walking into the reception room with Clara. Ranjana rose from her chair. "You look beautiful," she said, kissing Clara. I studied Uncle Ota. I was convinced he had stared at Clara so intensely when we arrived in Australia because of her resemblance to Emily. I had not gone back to Madame de Bliss. All I had achieved was to upset Esther, and maybe I had even disturbed Emily. I could not see that any good would come of going again, although I was curious about Uncle Ota's side of the story. But he had gotten past the shock of the similarities between Clara and Emily. He did not have stars in his eyes when he saw Clara in the reception room. He embraced her like a father hugging his daughter. "Thank God you are well again," he said. The admissions nurse handed Uncle Ota the discharge forms. I looked to the ward doors, hoping that Dr. Page would arrive to see us off. Unless Clara became sick again, which I would pray to God every day that she would not, this would be the last time we would be at Broughton Hall. "That's all," said the nurse, taking the forms from Uncle Ota. She glanced at me and her eyes gleamed. She was glad to be seeing the last of me. "Well, you are off now," said Dr. Page, walking into the reception area and smiling at Clara. He shook Uncle Ota's hand and told Ranjana that Clara needed adequate rest and quiet. "Thank you so much," I said, handing Dr. Page a package wrapped in tissue paper. "This is something from Clara and me." Dr. Page opened the paper to find a mud woman embracing the moon. His face brightened. "I don't have a female figure in my collection, would you believe?" he said with a smile. "She'll cause jealousy among the mudmen, no doubt." "We didn't know how to thank you," I told him. "You have been so good to us." "You've been supportive," Dr. Page said. "Your sister's recovery has as much to do with you as it does with me." His eyes settled on my face in such a pleasant way that I was overcome by shyness. The thought that I would never see him again left me feeling flat, despite my joy at Clara's recovery. I had looked forward to seeing Dr. Page on my visits to Broughton Hall. Uncle Ota guided Ranjana and Clara towards the door. Dr. Page stepped forward to open it. An old man in pajamas and a dressing gown was returning from the garden. We stood aside to let him pass. The man puffed and panted. "Good weather today," he said to Dr. Page. "It will be clear tonight. You'll see the Milky Way and the clouds of Magellan as if they were in your own sitting room." Uncle Ota looked at Dr. Page. His interest sparked. "Mr. Foster is an astronomer," Dr. Page explained. "He told me how to build my own telescope." "Truly?" asked Uncle Ota. Dr. Page laughed. "My father and I are quite obsessed. We sweep the sky every night hoping for a comet." "Would you and your father like to give a talk to a social group of ours?" asked Uncle Ota. "They'd be very interested." My heart leapt at the thought of Dr. Page coming to our house, but he blushed and shifted his feet. "Perhaps you can't meet with patients after they have been discharged," I said, trying to ease his embarrassment and hide my disappointment at the same time. Why should he feel awkward about the invitation? Dr. Page shook his head. "As long as we are not treating a patient, there is no problem with seeing them or their family outside of the clinic." He glanced at me. "I would be delighted to come. My father would too." I was glad he seemed easier about the invitation and wondered if he would bring his fiancée. I was fascinated by the idea of the woman who held Dr. Page captive. "Good," said Uncle Ota, pulling a notepad from his pocket and scribbling down our address. "How about Tuesday week?" A fortnight later, Dr. Page and his father arrived at our home. Dr. Page Sr. jutted his chin out and scanned the curiosities in the parlor as a soldier might study the landscape for signs of the enemy. The turn of his mouth was grim, and his hair, shirt, and jacket were fastidiously neat. I had overheard the ward nurse say that Dr. Page's father was the most famous surgeon in Sydney. I glanced at his pale, tapered hands. They were not hands one expected to belong to such a solidly built man. They were as delicate as Clara's, and only slightly larger. "I am very pleased to meet you," said Dr. Page Sr. when his son introduced us to him. He had a well-modulated voice, but there was a hint of tension in it. "Tonight we should be able to see the Milky Way from Scorpius to Orion in its entirety," he continued. "Centaurus is one of the most spectacular constellations. It's too far south to be seen from the northern hemisphere. The Aborigines regard the Milky Way as a river-in-the-sky world, where all the bright stars are fish and the smaller ones are water lilies," Dr. Page said, winking at Clara. "I like that," said Clara. "It makes me think Mr. Rudolph might be there." "Well, let's get started, shall we?" said Uncle Ota, helping to pick up the boxes the Pages had brought with them and leading them to the front of the gathering. The audience was transfixed by the talk on how the Pages had built their own telescope. While Dr. Page Sr. discussed the mechanics of mirror-making, his son spoke about the history of telescopes. He had an obvious regard for Galileo, who stood up to the Holy Roman Church in defense of his scientific theories about the universe. "The professor who lectured me in psychiatry often quoted Galileo," Dr. Page told us. "You cannot teach a man anything. You can only help him find it within himself." I saw Dr. Page Sr. stiffen. He disapproved of something. Was it psychiatry or Galileo? When the formal lecture was over, the doctors invited the audience to look through the telescope at Rigel in Orion and Alpha Centauri. When it was my turn to peer through the telescope, Dr. Page adjusted it for my height. "Rigel is the 7th brightest star and is supposed to represent Orion's, the hunter's, left foot," he said. "I don't think you would have liked Orion. The legend has it that he wanted to kill all the animals in the world, and, to prevent that happening, a scorpion bit him. After his death, he was placed in the sky." "You are interested in legends, then?" I asked Dr. Page, stepping aside so the next guest could look through the telescope. Isn't that unusual for a scientific man? It's through science that we understand the workings of life, Dr. Page answered. But it is through legends and stories that we understand the meaning. Clara placed a record on the gramophone. The shimmering notes of the Blue Danube floated about the room. I wanted to know Dr. Page better. I was intrigued by him. I had spoken with him in his capacity as Clara's doctor, but I wanted to discover more about his mind. Afterwards there was supper and Esther's delicious walnut cake. Everyone grouped together into more intimate conversations. I saw Dr. Page heading in my direction. He had 2 cups of tea in his hands, and I assumed he was making his way towards one of the other guests. But to my surprise, he stopped in front of me. "Black with a slice of lemon and a pinch of sugar," he said, handing me the cup and saucer. "How did you know how I like my tea?" I asked, taking it from him. "I'm a psychiatrist," said Dr. Page. "You'd be surprised how much I know about you by the shape of your face." "Truly?" I asked. "You can tell how I like my tea from the shape of my face?" Dr. Page's smile beamed brighter. "No, I asked your aunt how you take it." I laughed along with Dr. Page, but felt foolish, although I was sure he had not intended his joke to demean me. I could feel my face turning red, so I diverted the conversation. "I am embarrassed when I think of myself bursting in on you in the men's ward," I confessed to him. "I should apologize for that." "Please don't," he said. "You can't imagine how glad I am that you did. It showed you cared about your sister. A lot of patients are taken to Broughton Hall by their relatives and just left there." "The quote you gave from Galileo," I asked him, "is that how you feel about psychiatry? That you help people find the truth within themselves?" Dr. Page took a sip of tea. "The human mind is so complex," he said. "I once had a patient who believed he was a hemophiliac, although there was no physical evidence to support it. He cut himself on a piece of wire one day. It was the most superficial of wounds, and yet he bled to death. Psychiatry is a fascinating subject, but I'm not sure I'm doing anyone any good." I was shocked to hear Dr. Page speak that way. He had helped Clara, and I assumed from the way the other patients' demeanors lifted when they saw him that he had helped them too. I wanted to ask what he meant, but before I had the chance, Uncle Ota appeared by our side. "Dr. Page," he said, "your father is interested in some photographs my niece has taken. He would like her to explain them to him. Would you care to join us?" A faint smile appeared on Dr. Page's lips. "Certainly," he said. "Miss Rose took some interesting pictures of a friend of mine. I'm most fascinated by her work." I wasn't sure what Dr. Page meant, and then I remembered the mud man. I laughed sincerely this time, and so did he. We followed Uncle Ota to the corner of the room where my photographs hung and where Dr. Page Sr. was waiting. I had taken a series of magpies that I was proud of, and a Gothic-looking photograph of a family of tawny frogmouths huddled on a tree branch. Amongst these beauties of nature were portraits of Uncle Ota, Ranjana, Thomas, and Clara. I had wanted one of Esther too, but she had refused to pose. "So, you are not a pictorialist," said Dr. Page Sr., slipping on his glasses and studying the photographs. He was looking at the portrait of Clara, where I had kept the edges soft and emphasized her face and hands, filling in the dimensions with side lighting. "No," I said. "Australian photography hasn't embraced the avant-garde ideas that have dominated Europe since the war," explained Uncle Ota. "Painterly techniques and soft romantic views prevail here. Adela has brought a bit of Prague to Australia. Dr. Page Sr. turned to me. Do you do commissions? He asked. I want a portrait of myself and my son. I was thinking of an oil painting, but having seen your style, I like the idea of a photograph much better. I was lost for an answer. I was hardly a professional photographer, and was not sure I could live up to what Dr. Page Sr. was expecting. He seemed like an exacting man. What a delightful idea, said Dr. Page. Please say you'll do us the honor, Miss Rose. I realized that I'd been given a way to more adequately repay Dr. Page for his kindness to Clara than the gift of the mudwoman. I think a portrait of father and son is a wonderful idea, I said. I'm honored that you have asked me to take it. Dr. Page Sr. frowned. My son will be marrying soon and leaving me. The portrait will be a memento. Dr. Page winced. Father likes to dramatize things, he said. He has some idea that after Beatrice and I are married, we'll forget him. Nothing could be further from the truth. His father smiled, and I wondered if he had been seeking that reassurance from his son. Beatrice keeps him on tenterhooks, he said. No sooner do they set a wedding date than she's off travelling again. But she's promised to settle down soon. She told me the other day that she's ready to have babies. Lots of them. The mention of Dr. Page's fiancée unsettled me. I'd been enjoying having him to myself that evening, although I was surprised that he had not brought her with him. Her name conjured up an image of a slinky brunette with exotic eyes. She would have to be someone magnificent to hold men like the Pages under her spell. You will have your hands full with grandchildren, then, I said cheerfully to Dr. Page Sr. I don't think you will be forgotten or left alone. Dr. Page glanced at me. There was a distinct look of worry in his eyes, but I could not fathom what had disturbed him. After the guests had left, I helped Uncle Otto straighten up the parlor. Ranjana, Esther, and Clara had already washed the dishes and retired to bed. We were alone together for the first time since Esther and I had gone to Madame de Blisse's séance. You have your first commission, said Uncle Otto, plumping the cushions. His face was turned away from me, but I heard the pride in his voice. He was as good to me as my own father had been. What had Mother written to him in that letter that Milos had destroyed? And why had they both quoted lines from May? Now we were alone together, I took a deep breath and broached the subject. I want to ask you about my Aunt Emily. Uncle Otto froze mid-action. Emily? He repeated, turning slowly. He sat down on the sofa and hummed a piece of music. It took me a moment to place it. Quando m'en vo, from Puccini's La Bohème. He stopped humming and smiled sadly. Your father and I first saw your mother and aunt at the opera. They were so beautiful, he said. I waited for him to say something more, but he started humming again. His mind was far away, remembering something. I watched him, trying to read his thoughts. But what happened in Prague, when my mother and her sister and my father and Uncle Otto were young, was still a mystery. The following week, I arrived at the Pages' residence in Edgecliff with Uncle Otto's camera. He was working as an usher at Tilly's Cinema most weeknights, as well as his guide job at the museum. Clara's illness had brought home the importance of extra money. You make use of my camera, he told me. I'm too busy. The Pages' house was white with green shutters and a red shingled roof with wide eaves. The maid invited me inside, and I was impressed by the restful atmosphere. The floors were polished hardwood, and the rugs and walls were in soft tones of sand and stone. Dr. Page and his father were waiting for me in the sitting room. "Good morning," Dr. Page Sr. said, rising from his chair. "I thought we would have the picture taken here." The room opened onto a flagged terrace with a view across Double Bay to Manly. It was pleasant, not fancy, and the natural light was serene. I was surprised Dr. Page Sr. wanted to be photographed in the sitting room rather than the formal drawing room I had passed in the hall. Perhaps he was not as severe as he first appeared. "Father and I are fond of this room," Dr. Page said to me. "It's like a comfortable armchair that one sinks into and finds hard to get out of again." "The subject of a photograph should be in their natural environment," I said. "Otherwise the result will be posed and insincere." "My sentiments exactly," said Dr. Page. He was looking smart in a grey suit with his hair swept back from his face. I was wearing a taupe skirt and blouse that I had sewn myself. A thrill ran through me when I caught him glancing at me with admiration. His fiancée must have many beautiful clothes, so I was pleased that he approved of my one good business outfit. I suggested that the photograph be taken at the bureau, where Dr. Page Sr. could sit and his son stand, and where the light from the window was gentle. I did not use a meter for my work. I could not afford one, but judging the light by guesswork was an advantage. It trained me to see things the way my camera would. The bureau was cluttered with bric-a-brac that was distinctly feminine. Shepherdesses and angels. A set of Royal Doulton cat figurines. "You can move those if you think they are distracting," said Dr. Page Sr. "But the ornaments add personality to the scene," I said. "Did they belong to the late Mrs. Page?" Dr. Page Sr.'s lips trembled, and he nodded. I was taken aback by the unexpected show of emotion. "It would be nice, then, to include them in your photograph with your son," I told him. "It puts her in the picture with you." Having lost my own mother, I was moved by the mix of happiness and pain I saw on the men's faces when I mentioned Mrs. Page. My eyes met Dr. Page's, and I saw that we understood each other. There was something refreshing about not having to make further explanations. After the photographs had been taken, Dr. Page Sr. invited me to join him and his son for lunch. I discreetly sorted my way through the pickled meats and sausages to find the lettuce and tomatoes, but Dr. Page noticed. "I'll ask the cook to bring you vegetable soup," he said. I nodded gratefully. He had gone to some trouble to make sure Clara was served meatless dishes at Broughton Hall. Another doctor might have scoffed at the idea. The maid entered and whispered to Dr. Page Sr. He excused himself to take a telephone call. When he left the room, I asked Dr. Page if he had told his father how we had met each other. I mean, does he know about Clara? Dr. Page shook his head. "I told him I met your uncle at the museum. Father doesn't need to know everything. Sometimes it's better when he doesn't." "Thank you," I said. "I want to put what happened with Clara in the past. I want her to have a fresh start. Illnesses of the mind have a stigma about them." "I know," said Dr. Page. "By the way, call me Philip. We aren't on formal terms now." "Philip," I repeated, "and you must call me Adela." "What a lovely name," said Philip. "It rolls off the tongue. Adela." He pronounced my name perfectly. We turned back to our food. Dr. Page Sr.'s voice boomed from the hall. Europe again. Then, after a pause, he said more calmly, "Well, yes, I suppose if you are not well." Philip clutched his knife and fork. I assumed Dr. Page Sr. was talking to his fiancée's mother. It sounded as if his fiancée was planning another trip. "I want to ask you what you meant the other night about psychiatry," I said, trying to distract Philip from the telephone conversation. "Why do you think you can't help people? You did so much for Clara." A shadow passed over his face. "I hope to change specialties," he said, pushing around a carrot on his plate. "I want to work with children. Perhaps if I can help people when they are young, there may never be a need for places like Broughton Hall." That was a beautiful vision, I thought. "Where will you study? The University of Sydney?" I asked. "London, most likely," he said. I had a sense that Philip wanted to say something more, but before he had the chance, his father stormed into the room. "Well, they are off again," Dr. Page Sr. said. "Helen plans to leave in a few months. She wants to take the waters in Switzerland, even though they have just come back from France. I don't want any dilly-dallying this time, Philip. You are going with them, and I want you and Beatrice to have wedding rings on your fingers before you leave." The colour rushed to Philip's cheeks. "I can't give up Broughton Hall at the drop of a hat, Father." Dr. Page Sr. waved his hand. "Psychiatry! It's a hoax profession. What sort of doctor doesn't heal with his hands?" Philip glared at his father. Dr. Page Sr. did not respect what Philip did, and I could see that it hurt him. I left the Pages' house that day, puzzled. I understood that Dr. Page Sr.'s gruffness may have had something to do with his wife's death, and that he did not approve of Philip's chosen profession. But what baffled me most was Philip's relationship with Beatrice. For a man who was supposed to be head over heels in love, he did not seem sure. I returned to the Pages' house the following week to show them the prints. "The tones are rich," said Dr. Page Sr., "and the photographs so well composed." Philip approached his appraisal from a psychological point of view. "The pictures show the photographer's positive worldview," he said. "Father, look how peaceful we appear together, and Adela has even managed to bring out the tranquility of the room." I remembered the tension that had erupted between Philip and his father after the portrait had been taken. But Philip was not being sarcastic. Perhaps peaceful was the way he preferred to think of his relationship with his father. "Well, now we must pay you," Dr. Page Sr. said to me. "I can't accept any money." Dr. Page Sr. lifted his eyebrows, and I realized I had spoken too soon. As a portrait photographer, I should charge him. But Philip had been kind to Clara, beyond what Broughton Hall required of him, and I wanted to thank him. But I could not say that, so I gave another reason for why I would not charge for the photographs. "I have a confession to make," I said. "I'm not a professional portrait artist. You are my first commission. I have only taken pictures of my family and birds and dogs before. But I was flattered by your invitation and did not wish to refuse. I hope you forgive me." "Forgive you?" said Dr. Page Sr. "You must let us help you. Such a talent as yours can't be wasted." He turned to Philip. "Tell Beatrice about Miss Rose. I would like a portrait of her as well. That way I shall have something to remember you both by when you leave for Europe." Philip clenched his fists. I could feel another tense mood coming on between him and his father. "Of course I will do that," I said, before their tempers had a chance to take hold. "Just tell me when." The following week, Dr. Page Sr. arrived in his chauffeur-driven Bentley to take me to meet his soon-to-be daughter-in-law. "You'll like the lovely Beatrice," said Dr. Page Sr., once the chauffeur had packed my equipment in the boot and started the motor. "She's been away in France for months, and I've missed her good humour. She has a positive effect on me." "Was she at finishing school?" I asked. Dr. Page Sr. laughed. "Oh, Beatrice would have none of that. Besides, she has a charm of her own. No, unfortunately, her mother is not well, and they went there to take the waters and breathe the mountain air." A short while later, the chauffeur pulled into the driveway of a house in Rose Bay. The garden was tropical with palms and tree ferns. The plain sandstone bricks of the house were a contrast to its richly decorated interior. My eyes did not know which detail to take in first when the butler invited us into the entrance hall. The French silk wallpaper, the hand-painted cupids on the ceiling roses, the chandelier that sent sparkles of light around the floor. The butler showed us to the drawing room, and my senses were besieged by the wood panelling, Persian drapes, and the gold detailing on the teak chairs. The door opened, and two ladies entered. They were so different from each other that if Dr. Page Sr. had not introduced them as mother and daughter, I never would have guessed that they were related. Beatrice was wiry with hair the colour of wild strawberries. Her hair was so untamed it looked as though it were on the verge of escaping the gold clasp that bound it and scampering around the room. She was not the woman I had pictured. "Ah, you are here," she said, throwing herself towards us. She kissed Dr. Page Sr., then turned to me. "I'm excited to meet you," she said, stepping so close to me that she trod on my foot. She was almost as tall as Uncle Ota, and next to her I felt like a child. If she wanted to stand for her photograph, I would have to climb on a box. Beatrice introduced me to her mother. Mrs. Fay was a frail woman with mousy brown hair and a waxen face. From the way she wheezed and struggled for breath, I could see that she was seriously ill. But the affection between her and the vital Beatrice was obvious from the look of love in her eyes when her daughter helped her into a chair and covered her knees with a shawl. "How are you, Helen?" asked Dr. Page Sr., sitting down next to Mrs. Fay. "Oh, still here," she answered, with weariness in her voice. I bowed my head, trying to compose myself. Beatrice was so full of life, and yet I felt for her. She was going to watch her mother die, perhaps not for another year or two, but more slowly than I had witnessed mine pass. I wished there was something kind I could say to help her bear that blow, but there were no words for such things that could be said to friends or strangers. "I suppose we can't keep Miss Rose waiting," said Beatrice, bouncing towards the windows and tugging the curtains apart. With the light on her face, I saw that she was about 25 years old, too old for finishing school, and that her white skin was covered in freckles. Most women would have bleached the spots with lemon juice or powdered over them, but Beatrice appeared to have made no such effort. "Well, I must be off to see some patients," said Dr. Page Sr., rising from his chair. "I'll leave you ladies to it. The Fays chauffeur will take you home, Miss Rose." After Dr. Page Sr. had departed, Beatrice laid her hand on my arm. "Old Dr. Page told me that you are a vegetarian. Is that true?" "Yes, that's right," I answered. "So you never eat meat?" asked Beatrice, sitting down on a footstool so that her knees jutted upwards and made her look like a frog on a lily pad. "Not chicken or fish or anything?" If Beatrice was about to ridicule me, I had no intention of being belittled for caring about lives other than my own. I've seen maids behead chickens, a neighbour kill a cow with a poleaxe, and a butcher drive a spike between a horse's eyes, I told her. Those poor creatures struggled and thrashed about in terror. It's like murder to take their lives when we don't need to. Beatrice's green eyes focused on my face. She was not a pretty girl, but I understood what Dr. Page Sr. had meant about her not needing finishing school, and why Philip was in love with her. Beatrice had something about her that was transfixing. She thumped her palms on her knees. "Well, that's bloody fantastic," she said. "I wish I was that strong, because I feel the same way. But nobody I know, apart from you now, is a vegetarian, and Mother says it simply isn't English." We both looked to Mrs. Fay. "It's not natural," she said. "We were meant to eat meat." "Well, Mother," said Beatrice, rising from her seat, "I'm going to invite Miss Rose to our next special luncheon, and I'm going to tell the cook to make it a vegetarian one. It may be good for you." There was no malice in Beatrice's voice, but I knew that if I had ever spoken to my mother that way, let alone sworn, I would have been sent out of the room. Mrs. Fay merely laughed at her daughter. "Have some vegetable dishes if you wish, my dear," she said. "Philip and Robert will go along with you, but Freddie and Alfred will be horrified. You'd better have some lamb chops for them, or they won't come again." Then she turned to me and gave a shrug as if to say, "You see what life has handed me? What does one do with such a willful daughter?" Beatrice plonked herself in a rosewood armchair and wagged her finger. "There are too many boys around this family. I need girls to fight them with." Beatrice was a magnetic character. That men might find her charming did not surprise me. She was vibrant, loud, and forceful. I glanced around the room and realized that the overblown wallpaper and frilly cushions were at odds with her breezy personality. "I wonder if you might prefer your photograph taken in the garden?" I asked her. "The light is good. I'd like to place you in a natural setting." Beatrice jumped out of her chair. "Bloody marvellous idea," she said. "No wonder Philip thinks so much of you." I was surprised and flattered at the same time. Philip had talked about me to Beatrice? Few ladies smiled in portrait photographs, and those that did rarely showed their teeth. Beatrice grinned in every pose, whether I told her to or not. "So what if it gives me wrinkles and makes my teeth look big?" she laughed. "If I look too serious, people won't recognize me." Afterwards, we returned to the house, where Mrs. Fay was waiting at a table laid out with scones and tea. "So you will come to our luncheon when we get around to organizing it?" Beatrice asked, motioning for me to sit down. "I'll make sure there are nice dishes for you." She was so captivating and so earnest in her invitation that I could not see any way I could refuse. No wonder she can keep Philip on a string, I thought. You just cannot say no to her. Chapter 11. One evening, Uncle Ota came home with exciting news for us. He asked Ranjana, Clara, Esther, and me to sit on the sofa before making his announcement. "Mr. Tilly is retiring and has offered me the role of manager of his cinema." After a moment of stunned silence, we broke into cries of elation. Being promoted from head usher to manager was a significant leap in responsibility. Mr. Tilly had obviously recognized that Uncle Ota had the flair necessary to manage a cinema. I could not have been more pleased for my uncle. The Tuesday night soirees had allowed him to experiment with his entrepreneurial skills. Now, at the helm of a suburban cinema, he could put his showmanship to full use. "Well," said Ranjana, standing up to make a pot of tea, "that's 2 family members in entertainment, and 1 to go." She grinned at me. Dr. Page Sr. and Mrs. Fay were so pleased with the portrait I took of Beatrice that they were determined to find more clients for me. "There are society ladies who require portraits of themselves and their daughters, some of whom need help in the looks department," Dr. Page Sr. told me. Helen and I are going to send you to some wealthy clients, and I want you to charge them and charge them well," he said, cocking his eyebrow. "You have exceptional talent, and most of them have more money than they have sense. If they don't spend their money on a good portrait, they will only spend it on a frivolous dress. Think of it that way." Dr. Page Sr. kept his word, and before long I was photographing debutantes, society weddings, and children. Word about my individual touch spread, and I often undertook several sittings in one day. One society matron said I was the only photographer who could bring out the darkness of her eyes, while another claimed I had diminished her prominent chin by using the light correctly. I usually photographed my clients in their homes, and by the time Clara attended her first class at the Conservatorium High School, I was being welcomed into some of the grandest manors in Sydney. "You must make Edith look beautiful," Beatrice told me when she accompanied me to Bellevue Hill, where I was to photograph her friend. "I haven't got many female friends," she said, hurrying up the gravel drive bordered by crepe myrtles towards the Greek Revival mansion. "Actually, the only female friends I have are Edith and you." I followed Beatrice past the columns to the entrance of the house. She turned the ringer. I wondered how she had decided I was her friend. I had only met her once. But it seemed to me that whatever Beatrice willed came to pass. So I accepted it as a compliment. It was no trifle for a woman who worked for her living to be befriended by a socialite. A maid answered the door and ushered us to a drawing-room with a Turkish rug and 2 marble fireplaces. Beatrice and I sat down on a toile de campagne sofa. "Edith will be my bridesmaid, and I'm determined to do something for her," Beatrice whispered. "She desperately wants a husband, but we can't get Harold Casno to agree to take her portrait for Home magazine, and her mother wants some pictures of the house when you're finished. If you get them into the Sydney Morning Herald, she will pay you extra." Photography had been a means of expression, but now I was making significant money out of it. As Dr. Page Sr. had told me, society ladies were prepared to pay generously for a flattering portrait. The door opened and a woman Beatrice's age stepped into the room. Her skin was alabaster and her pale eyes were framed by colourless lashes. Her washed-out appearance did not bode well for a photograph to catch a husband. "This is Edith," said Beatrice, standing up to embrace her friend. Edith grinned, revealing enormous teeth and an inch of gum. My mind raced to think how I could photograph her. Perhaps if I had her turn slightly away from the camera, I could emphasize her long neck and straight profile. "Shall we begin?" I asked. After the photography session, Edith insisted we stay for tea. "Will we have it here in the drawing room?" she asked. "No, let's sit on the balcony where it's lovely and cool," said Beatrice. Edith led us to the balcony, which overlooked the lawn, and told the maid to bring us tea. A breeze sprang up and sent the smell of gardenias wafting around us. "So, you'll be marrying soon?" said Edith to Beatrice. "Have you set a date yet?" "God, don't you start," said Beatrice, lifting her hair and dropping it so that its roll fanned out and became untidy. "I've got everyone else on my back." Edith laughed. "Oh well, reluctance keeps a man keen." She turned to me and flashed her horsey smile. "It's always been Beatrice and Philip, as long as I can remember," she said. "They were born on the same day, 3 years apart. Our families used to holiday every year in the southern tablelands, and Philip and Beatrice had 2 ponies, who they called Lancelot and Guinevere. Romantic, isn't it?" Beatrice smiled. "Philip and I spent our days by the river. He pretended to be the captain of a cargo ship, and I pretended to be a pirate." I listened with interest as Beatrice and Edith talked about Philip. They knew things about him that I did not, the names of his childhood pets, that he had attended the King's School, that he hated sour cream. "He wants to join an air club," Beatrice told Edith, "and buy his own plane." "How daring," her friend replied, pouring us another cup of tea and passing around the date slice. While Beatrice and Edith spoke, it dawned on me that they discussed Philip's sporting achievements and weekend hobbies, but never mentioned his work. It was surprising, because to Philip, being a doctor was everything. Beatrice continued to intrigue me. The society friends to whom Mrs. Fay recommended me were often mothers of young men, and seemed to be living in hope that Beatrice might tire of Philip. "Such a beautiful girl," one matron told me, after I had photographed her sitting on a sofa with her papillon puppy. "Wasted on Dr. Philip Page." Beatrice was strolling around the garden while I took the photographs, and I hoped the woman might expand on what she meant before she returned. "That young man does not need to work for a living," the woman continued. "If he had any sense, he would be with her all the time." It was an interesting observation, I thought, because it seemed to me that the difficulties in their relationship were caused by Beatrice's reluctance to spend time with Philip. It did not take Uncle Ota long to make a success of Tilly's cinema. He selected programs the regular cinema-goers liked, placed advertisements in the local paper, and printed handbills to give out at the end of a session that announced the following week's program. He introduced a lolly bag promotion for a sweet shop for the children's matinee. Each Saturday afternoon, throngs of children gathered outside the cinema. Ranjana and I handed them lolly bags before they burst into the cinema like a herd of wild boars. The promotion was a success, although the sweets were often hurled at the screen or rolled along the wooden floors, to the chagrin of our cleaners. Ranjana suggested Uncle Ota promote a weekly afternoon session for mothers with young children. She and I managed a creche while the women watched romance pictures. For some mothers, it was a chance to catch up on sleep they never got at home, and afterwards they were treated to a soothing cup of tea and music courtesy of Clara and a violinist friend before we handed their children back to them. While the changes Uncle Ota brought to the cinema were popular with the patrons, not everyone was enamored of him. The bookkeeper, who had been with Mr. Tilly for 15 years, protested against the extra workload Uncle Ota created and left to work with a law firm. Luckily, Esther proved to be an excellent replacement and took over the bookkeeping with few problems. A more drastic confrontation occurred the night the projectionist walked out. Ranjana took an interest in every aspect of the cinema. She had left her job at the factory to help Uncle Ota, and she wandered around behind the scenes looking for things to do. She enjoyed watching the loading of the films onto the projector and often entered the projection room when a film was screening to watch the projectionist at work. "I want you to train my wife to be your assistant," Uncle Ota told our projectionist. "If you get sick, we won't be able to have a session." Uncle Ota was preoccupied with running the cinema and did not notice the projectionist's pinched mouth. The following night, during the screening of Sunshine Sally, Ranjana, unaware that her fascination with sprockets and spools grated on the projectionist's nerves, was taken by surprise when he stormed out of the room, leaving the film to wind off the projector. The picture on the screen dimmed just as Sally was about to find out who her real parents were, then flickered before spinning off. The audience booed. Clara, drilled by Mr. Tilly for such a crisis, struck up a sing-along number on the piano. "What's wrong with you?" Uncle Ota hissed at the projectionist out in the wings. "If my wife's presence was annoying you so much, why didn't you speak up earlier?" "What's wrong with you?" the projectionist spat back. "That you can't see the colour of your wife." Uncle Ota's eyes narrowed. If he had punched the projectionist in the face for the insult, I could not have blamed him. But just as Uncle Ota clenched his fists for a fight, the audience burst into cheers. The picture was back on the screen, and coming out brighter and steadier than usual, and at a much better speed. Ranjana waved to us from the projectionist's window. The projectionist realized he was beaten. He snatched his jacket and ran for the door. "Never stoop to answer a slight, and soon the truth will come to light," Uncle Ota shouted after him. Ranjana became our projectionist, and while a female in the role could have been a novelty, we never let the audience see her in case someone objected to an Indian screening the film. Ranjana wore an opera mask when she worked in case anybody glimpsed her through the projection room window. This led to tales of the masked projectionist of Tilly's cinema, and speculation that our projectionist might be a criminal camouflaging razor scars or a Russian prince in hiding. The rumours were good for business, and we never had an empty session. Ranjana thought the escapade amusing, especially when Union Theatres and Hoyts, having heard of the excellent projection at Tilly's cinema, sent her letters offering positions. "I should accept one for the fun of it," she joked. "Imagine their faces when I roll up demanding my 2 shillings per film." Even though I'd had to buy a Kodak folding camera and upgrade my darkroom facilities, I was coming out ahead with my portrait work. Esther had given me enough money for Clara's first year of tuition, but unless Aunt Josephine was able to send us more money soon, I would have to earn enough to cover her tuition for the rest of the time she attended the school. I wished I could write to Aunt Josephine to tell her what I was doing, earning my own living. She would be proud. My career kept me busy, and I had not been to the vegetarian cafe in weeks. I decided to take Clara there one day after school. But when we arrived, the cafe was crowded. The only seats left were in the booth where the young man with the cockatoo was sitting with his skinny companion. "We'll have to come back later," I said to Clara. We were about to leave when a voice called out, "You're welcome to sit here. We weren't planning on staying much longer." I turned to see that the skinny man was pointing towards the spare bench opposite him. Something about his bright smile made me accept his offer, although I was embarrassed about my last encounter with his friend. "I am Peter," the skinny man introduced himself. He was wearing his usual cap and scarf, although it was hot outside. His gigantic eyes and grin made me think of Felix the cat. "This is my friend Hugh, and that is Giallo, sitting on his shoulder. Giallo found himself on the wrong side of a Rottweiler, and Hugh found himself in the wrong trench." I was surprised at Peter's flippancy. Hugh grimaced, but did not seem offended. Now I was close up, I saw he was a good-looking man with Irish skin and light blue eyes. He nodded to us, although he did not smile. I let Clara into the booth and took the place next to her. "I am Adela, and this is my sister, Clara," I told the men. Clara flashed me a surprised look, because we had all introduced ourselves to each other by our Christian names, but the atmosphere at the vegetarian cafe was very informal. "You don't sound like kangaroos," said Peter with a laugh. "Where are you from?" "Prague," I answered. Clara scratched the cockatoo's head. He closed his eyes and leaned towards her. "Giallo does not sound very Australian," she said, taking up Peter's playful tone. "I drove ambulances in Italy during the war," Peter said. "The day I returned to Sydney, I found poor Giallo lying in a ditch. He barely had his flight feathers, and I didn't expect him to live, but I took him home and kept him warm. The next day he was lively and calling to be fed. I took him to meet Hugh, who was still in the army hospital. It was love at first sight for both of them." I glanced at Hugh, who said nothing, but did not seem as sullen as my first impression. Perhaps he was self-conscious around people, as many men who had lost limbs seemed to be. Besides, Peter was so talkative it was hard to get in a word. Peter turned out to be knowledgeable about Europe and about classical composers. He was interested in Uncle Ota's job at the cinema and nearly jumped out of his seat with excitement when we told him the story of how our uncle had saved his wife from Sati. We found out that he had been an art student the day war broke out, and he had become a vegetarian after the armistice was declared. War makes life cheap. I wanted to make it sacred again. I couldn't stand bloodshed anymore, and especially not of innocent animals, he told us. We were talking about castles in Czechoslovakia when Hugh suddenly interrupted by asking me, "What's your surname?" "Rose," I replied. He lifted his eyebrows. "Adela Rose, the photographer." It was strange to be referred to that way. I had photographed many elite people in a short amount of time, but I found it difficult to call myself a photographer, let alone Adela Rose, the photographer. I considered myself an amateur who had found herself in the right place at the right time. "I've seen your work in the Sydney Morning Herald," Hugh said. The newspaper had published the pictures I had taken of Edith's house. It was a significant professional leap for me, but Hugh would have had to have studied every picture in the paper to have noticed my credit. Although he did not say whether he liked the photographs or not, I was flattered he had remembered them. "Hugh is a photographer too," said Peter. "He's shooting my picture." My heart skipped a beat. "Your picture?" Peter nodded. "Production begins soon. I have my actors and budget sorted out. I just don't have a script girl yet." "What does a script girl do?" I asked. "She's the second pair of eyes to the director," Peter said. "She sits beside him and times the scenes with a stopwatch. She records the takes and types them up for the editor. And she also makes notes on what the actors are wearing in each scene, in case anything has to be shot again later." He flashed a rueful smile. "My girlfriend did it for me on my other pictures, but she's found another bloke." "Your other pictures?" I cried. "How many have you made?" Peter puffed out his chest. "I've made 2 so far, and I have a much bigger budget for this one." Clara pinched me, but I did not need any prompting. "I could be your script girl," I told him. "I can type, and I'm very interested in the pictures." Peter was taken aback for a second, but then his face broke into a grin. "Truly? What luck, then? And I suppose you'd be willing to take the stills photographs as well?" "Of course," I said. "Settled," said Peter. Clara squeezed my leg, Peter grinned, and Giallo did a bobbing dance. Only Hugh's grim expression gave any clue that something might be amiss. I received an invitation to a luncheon at Beatrice's home, along with an apology that it had taken her longer to arrange than she had expected, and a promise that she would send her chauffeur to pick me up. The day of the luncheon I arrived at her residence, and the butler showed me to the drawing room, where Beatrice and Philip were waiting with the other guests. It was a surprise to see Beatrice and Philip together, as I had only known them apart. I was astonished by their mismatched heights. Beatrice stood much taller than Philip. She leapt towards me and seized my arm. "Our guest of honor is here," she cried. I noticed the engagement ring on her finger, an emerald set in white gold with brilliant cut diamonds. It was the kind of ring I would have chosen. I was not one to covet other people's things. Mother had said it was vulgar, so I was repulsed by the feelings of jealousy that rose in my heart. The other guests stepped forward to greet me. Philip said hello before introducing an elderly couple who turned out to be Beatrice's aunt and uncle, Mr. and Mrs. Rowland. "Oh, no formalities, please," said Mrs. Rowland, who had the same red hair as her niece. "Call me Florence." "Adela," I said in return. Florence blinked, and I was startled to see that she had false eyelashes glued to her lids. Society ladies never adorned themselves with artifice. That was for actresses and harlots. I wondered if Beatrice had inherited not only her aunt's red hair, but her eccentric manner as well. I thought of Aunt Josephine and her work ethic. Perhaps aunts have more influence on us than we realize. "I am Alfred," said Beatrice's uncle, a smile twitching beneath his walrus moustache. "But don't waste time with old fogies like us. Meet the young men." I smiled at the two male guests. The younger, who was about 20, wore his golden hair parted down the middle and a silk suit. His dress style was urbane, but his glowing face was as innocent as a country boy's. "I'm Robert Swan," he said, "and this is my friend, Frederick Rockcliffe." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Rose," Frederick said, in the growling tone of an American accent. It was something of a jolt to be referred to politely. I had become used to Beatrice and her family's habit of calling everyone by their Christian name. Frederick was around 30, with dark hair and shadows under his eyes. Along with his round face and tiny nose, he reminded me of a panda bear. I should have guessed from his shirt with the polka dots on it that he was a foreigner. It was too flamboyant for a luncheon. When we arrived at the dining room, the food was already on the table, and apart from the occasional appearance of a maid to clear dishes and refill our glasses, we served ourselves. I was glad that Beatrice was aware I was a vegetarian. My stomach turned at the sight of the platters of oily roasted quails, sautéed pigeons, and jugged hare. "What's in those?" asked Robert, pointing to a plate of stuffed tomatoes. "Cucumber and cream cheese," Beatrice answered him. "And over here we have mint salad and egg noodle pie. Adela is a vegetarian, and I am one today, too." "Good-o," said Robert. "I'll tuck into that, then. There's something very clean about vegetarian food. I dare say it's better for one's digestion." "It isn't English," said Mrs. Fay. She was looking better than she had previously, although she still wheezed. Beatrice leaned towards me. "Mother is third-generation Australian, but she worships everything English." Then, turning towards her mother, she said, "It's a good thing our ancestors were upstanding British convicts, isn't it? I was thinking of stealing a horse later today myself." Mrs. Fay sent her daughter a horrified look. "Will you stop saying things like that, Beatrice?" she said. "You know they were free settlers. Horse stealers, indeed." Philip and the Rowlands burst into laughter and were joined by Robert. Frederick and I exchanged a glance, not sure of the family humour. Philip brought order back to the discussion by asking me how Clara was finding the Conservatorium High School. I gave him a rundown of what she was learning in her eurythmics and musical theory classes. "Most of the lessons are taught by the head of the school, Alfred Steele," I told him, "with the exception of French, which is taken by Madame Henri." While I spoke, I was aware of how close Philip and Beatrice sat to each other. They looked comfortable together and nodded their heads in unison to show their interest in what I was saying. The jealous pang that had bothered me earlier pinched me again. "They had a devil of a time getting the Conservatorium of Music started," Robert said. "They not only had to form a school out of amateurs, but they had to educate the public about classical music to create an audience. There were many who said the money was better spent on hospitals and public works than highbrow music." "Robert is often invited to guest lecture at the Conservatorium of Music," Beatrice explained. "He plays the pipe organ." "Truly?" I asked Robert. The Conservatorium of Music was the tertiary institution above the high school Clara attended. "My interest is world instruments," he said. "I've just purchased an orchestrion, which contains a wind section, kettle drums, cymbals and triangles to simulate the sound of an orchestra." "I'd love to see that, Robert," said Beatrice, clasping her hands under her chin. Mrs. Fay coughed, and Beatrice hastily removed her elbows from the table. "Well, perhaps I should arrange afternoon tea once I've got it set up. It will take a while to arrive here from Germany," Robert said. He turned to me. "You could bring your sister. I would be delighted to meet her." Clara loved all things musical, and, with Robert's interest in unusual instruments, I was sure that she would be enthusiastic to meet him. I gladly accepted. The dessert was pêche melba, a mix of peaches, raspberry sauce, and ice cream. This dessert was created for the Australian opera singer, Nellie Melba, Philip explained to me and Frederick. As the ice cream is only one element, it takes the edge off the coldness and spares one's vocal cords. Florence turned to me. "You took Beatrice's and Edith's portraits, didn't you?" Before I could answer, Beatrice clapped her hands. "She did a wonderful job of Edith. She turned her into a beauty. It's given Edith a different picture of herself. She has bought herself racy new clothes and has become quite the centre of attention." "Well," said Florence, touching my arm, "if you made Edith a beauty, you must be good. Do you only take portraits?" "At the moment," I told her, "but I will soon be working on a picture as a script girl. I would like to make a film of my own some day." Philip looked at me. At first he seemed surprised. Then his face brightened. "Really?" he asked. "That's fascinating." "Ah, well," said Robert, nodding towards Frederick. "There's your man. Tell Adela what you do, Freddie." Frederick finished chewing the piece of peach he had in his mouth and turned to me. "I'm here with Galaxy Pictures. I work in film distribution." "You're here to destroy our local industry, according to the papers," Beatrice said. It was difficult to get used to how Beatrice spoke at the table. I had been brought up not to contradict a guest, lest it embarrass them. I had never seen an argument break out at luncheon. Tension, Mother always said, would give everyone indigestion. "Some might see it that way," Frederick answered, "but I don't." "Well," said Alfred, "take the case of one of our most famous directors, Franklin Barrett. He had to shut down his production company because he couldn't get his films distributed in his own country." Frederick sighed and looked at me. "What we do is sell packages of films in advance to Australian theatre chains and independents. This country has the highest cinema attendance in the world. Going to the pictures every week is even factored into the basic wage. Cinema managers need a constant supply of films. Only the United States produces enough of them to guarantee that supply." "That's all well and good," said Alfred. "But you distributors make the cinema managers purchase films 12 months in advance, and there are rumours that you fix it so Australian films can't get on the bill at all. American distributors have been accused of cutting off supplies of films to managers who dare to put Australian pictures on the program. Sounds to me like you Yankees are trying to shut down the industry here. The Americans talk about free trade and competition, but they prefer to be a monopoly themselves." "That's hogwash," Frederick hissed. "If the films are good enough, the cinema managers will show them." He flashed his eyes at me. "What sort of picture do you intend to make?" Frederick had put me on the spot. Apart from the fantasy of directing a film, I had given little thought as to the kind of picture I wanted to make. "I liked the films of Hans Richter and Fritz Lang," I told him. "Ah," said Frederick, laying his palms on the table and rolling his eyes. "Artistic films that don't make any money." "What sort of pictures make money?" Philip asked. "Doesn't art factor at all?" It was chivalrous of Philip to come to my defence. Beatrice, Alfred, and Frederick were shooting attacks and counterattacks around the table as if that were a normal way to make conversation. I felt unnerved, not to mention foolish. Frederick took a breath and spoke more calmly. "I'm sure Miss Rose will make an excellent film. I'm only saying that Australian audiences want romances and comedies." Dessert out of the way, our group moved to the garden for some tea and fruit served in the summer house. The conversation changed from the pictures to cricket and real estate at Palm Beach. Philip sat next to me. "If Australians don't make films about their own country, then they may as well be an American colony," he said. "Why is it that a Czech can see that better than we can?" "We were almost a colony under the Austro-Hungarian Empire," I told him. "Even for a Czech, the national language was German, a foreign language. It would be a shame if Australians gave up their own culture so easily." The Rowlands were setting out croquet hoops on the lawn. "I can't abide that mindless game," Philip said. "Shall we take a turn about the garden?" There was a path, wide enough for two, through the garden. We would not be out of the view of the other guests, so it did not seem improper to accept Philip's invitation. I walked next to him past the azaleas and oleanders, aware that our arms brushed against each other when the path pinched around a curve. "I told my father about my plans to study children's medicine," he said. "How did he respond?" "He would be happier if I pursued general surgery, but at least children's medicine is superior to psychiatry." "Why does he have such a poor opinion of psychiatry?" I asked. "It is healing the mind." Philip stopped in his tracks and looked back to the group playing croquet. "It is not just my father," he said. "It's the opinion most people have. Even Beatrice would prefer it if I dealt with matrons' dizzy spells and old men's gout, and she's not usually conservative." I thought of the lie my family had told about Emily having been bitten by a diseased dog. "People are ashamed of the mentally ill," I said. Philip turned to me. "You don't think that way, do you? You understand. You visited Clara every day and gave your real name. Don't most relatives give their real names?" "No." We walked on, and the path curved around the edge of the garden, turning back in the direction of the summer house. "I'll miss you when I go to Europe," Philip said. "It's so easy talking with you." I sensed feelings were changing between us and shrank back. Something was not right. Philip was engaged to Beatrice, but seemed happier speaking with me. "Beatrice will listen to you," I told him. "She'll understand if you make her." Philip shrugged. "Beatrice's conversations are one-sided and a bit like my father's," he said. The bitterness in his voice surprised me. Wasn't he in love with Beatrice? Perhaps he was frustrated because she was difficult to pin down. I did get the impression she had left him in limbo a few too many times. Beatrice saw us returning to the summer house and called out, "Come and join the game, Adela. I know Philip made you walk around the garden with him to avoid it. He does it every time." After a few rounds of hitting balls with mallets, 3 o'clock arrived, and I excused myself to go and meet Clara after school at the vegetarian cafe. While Beatrice went to arrange for the chauffeur to take me to the city, Frederick approached me. "I hope I didn't offend you," he said. "Beatrice gets me hot under the collar. She does it on purpose." "Not at all," I assured him, although he had made me feel foolish. "Officially, I distribute films," he said, running his hand over his slick hair. "But unofficially, I scout for talent. I produced several films back in the States. If you bring me your script, we can talk about it." "Thank you," I said, quite sure that unless I felt like making a mindless romance or a comedy, Frederick Rockcliffe was the last person I would approach to produce my picture. "Car's ready," Beatrice called from the house. The gathering walked to the front steps with me to bid me farewell. I was conscious that Philip lingered in the background. The chauffeur drove the car up to the front steps. There was a sudden pop, and then a hissing sound. Steam poured from the bonnet. The chauffeur climbed out and scratched his head. "The engine's overheated, Miss Beatrice." Beatrice rolled her eyes. "Again? That's twice this week." "I'm sorry, Adela." "I can take a taxi," I told her. "Nonsense," said Beatrice, wrapping her arm around me. "Philip will drive you to town. He has to go in that direction this afternoon anyhow." "I don't want to impose." "You won't be," Beatrice assured me. Then, leaning her head close to mine, she whispered, "It will be my way of apologizing for inflicting that crass American on you. He's a friend of Robert's. It's the only reason I invited him." Philip left the top of his Talbot down so we could enjoy the afternoon sunshine. The roar of the engine and the wind rushing by our ears limited our communication to smiles and nods. In a way, it was better. I did not want to talk about Beatrice. Philip turned the car into George Street and pulled up outside the vegetarian cafe. He craned his neck to look at the Gothic script sign and the pictures of smiling sheep and cows that adorned the windows. "Here?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm impressed by people who live by their convictions," he said. I expected that he would keep the engine running while he climbed out to open the door for me, but he pulled the car to the curb and turned the engine off. "You must think I'm a brute for how I spoke about Beatrice," he said. "As you can see, she's a terrific person, and she's certainly taken a shine to you." "Please don't apologize," I told him. "There's no need." Philip glanced at me and smiled. "You see, my mother and Mrs. Fay were best friends," he said. "After Beatrice was born, they always said that she and I would get married when we grew up. Nobody questioned it, least of all me or Beatrice. I think that's why I never bought a female mud figure. I never thought of there being other women." He turned and fixed his eyes on me. I was aware that his hand inched closer to mine, and I was sure he was going to clasp it and take me in his arms. But the spell was broken by Clara's arrival. "Dr. Page," she cried, hoisting her books higher under her arm, "are you joining us for afternoon tea?" "Hello," said Philip, opening his door and stepping around the car and onto the footpath to greet Clara. "No, I'm not going to impose on your time with your sister. I was dropping Adela off. We were at a luncheon together." Philip opened the door for me. He searched my face when I got out, but I looked away. Everything was different from how it had been just an hour ago. Philip had feelings for me beyond those of a friend, and I was drawn to him too. I had gone to Beatrice's luncheon expecting to have a good time, not for everything to be pulled off balance. "My class is giving our first concert next month," Clara told Philip. "I will be playing the Grieg piano concerto. Do you think you'll be able to come?" "Clara," I said, "Dr. Page is very busy, and that concert is during the day." "I'd be delighted," Philip said, cutting me off before I had a chance to finish. He looked from Clara to me. "I'll ask Robert and Freddie if they want to join me." I blushed to the roots of my hair. Clara noticed, which made my cheeks burn more. Philip wished us well and climbed back into his car and started the engine. He waved one more time before driving off. I was overcome by a sense of pleasure mixed with foreboding. I felt myself drawing closer to Philip, even as he moved away. Chapter 12. Production for Peter's film commenced with a tight shooting schedule of 3 weeks. Peter had to secure his main actor between theatrical roles and also make the most of daylight hours, as the days were growing shorter. It was a relief to have a distraction from thinking about Philip. We did not have a telephone at the house, so he had sent a note asking to see me. Several times a day I relived the pleasure of Philip's hand lingering near mine, and the idea that he had intended to embrace me. But after the pleasure came pain. I did not want to cause Philip and Beatrice suffering by coming between them. I did not believe it was possible to build my happiness on someone else's misery. So I did not answer the note. How could I? Beatrice was my friend. I arrived at Peter's studio in Surrey Hills for the first day of shooting and realized I was going to have my work cut out for me. The studio was on the top floor of a house in a street that had been condemned for demolition. The walls were lopsided and the veranda sagged, as if the dwelling knew its fate and was resigned to it. There was a brewery next door with a foundation stone marked 1851. The broken windows and chains across the doors suggested that it was condemned as well. I climbed the narrow stairs to the 3rd floor. Strains of Ravel's Pavane for a Dead Princess wafted through the door. I knocked, and Peter opened it. The studio was large, but crowded. Canvases were stacked against each other. Columns of phonograph records were piled against bookshelves crammed with not only books, but crockery, photographs, candle stubs, and beer bottles. On one shelf there was a set of stoneware mugs shaped into the faces of the British royal family. The floor was barely visible for the newspapers that lay strewn on it, as well as the brushes and paint tins. In the middle of the space, a light dangled from the ceiling with bits of paper pinned to its shade. The air reeked of mould and nitrate of cellulose, the latter, I guessed, emanating from stored films. I had heard that if you put a match to a single frame of film, you could blow your hand off. The studio was a bomb waiting to explode. "Come, meet the actors," said Peter, directing me towards the end of the studio, where Hugh was sitting with 2 men and a woman. We passed the light with the bits of paper stuck to it, and I saw that they were lists. Shopping lists, exercise lists, aims for the year lists. There was even a pre-production to-do list. For someone whose studio was so disorganized, Peter was obsessed with lists. I caught a glimpse of the items on the pre-production list. Meet with Adela to discuss storyline. Send crew location schedule. Those things had never happened, and I realized there was a difference between writing things down and doing them. "This is Leslie Norris," said Peter, introducing the oldest actor first. "What a pleasure," said Leslie, giving a flourish with his hand. His theatrical voice rattled my eardrums. He had a tic at the corner of his mouth, and I avoided looking at his face, afraid that I would inadvertently adopt it. Peter turned to the woman, who sniffed and screwed up her eyes before looking in the direction of the other man, who he introduced as Sonny Sutton. Sonny resembled a weather-beaten Rudolph Valentino, and the hand he used to push back his hair was blistered. "Welcome to the set," he said. His voice was as soft as Leslie's was loud. I thanked the men for their welcome and glanced at the woman. Peter introduced her as Valerie Howson. She sniffed again. I thought she had a cold, until I smiled and she responded by pinching her lips together. I realized that the likely answer to anything I asked Valerie would be a sniff. Her face was caked in powder, and she reeked of coty perfume. I was the only other female in the room, and I sensed that Valerie did not like the competition. With the introductions out of the way, we followed Peter up a flight of rusty stairs to the flat roof of the building, where a sitting room had been set up, with chintz lounges and maritime pictures on the walls. Stretched over the ceiling of the set was a layer of muslin. It billowed in the breeze like a wispy cloud. A faint whiff of hops drifted on the air. Hugh saw me looking at the cover. "The muslin diffuses the sunlight," he explained. "In Hollywood, they use Klieg lights. Here, we use nature." "Does it give a different effect?" I asked. "It's cheaper." Hugh's expression was harsh, but I sensed laughter under his breath. "You're going to have to be tight with the schedule," he told me, opening his camera case and setting up the tripod. I was mesmerized by the way he cradled the camera in his arm while balancing on one leg. "Peter bought his film from a director who's going out of business, but he could only get 9,000 feet to shoot this feature. And based on what Peter's done with his other films, we're going to need nearly all of that, which means we can't do too many takes." "What if I see a problem with the scene?" "You can make a suggestion," said Hugh, locking the camera onto the tripod, "but it's Peter's call to do a retake." He peered into the lens and tilted the camera upwards. It seemed as though we were going to do a lot of single takes, so I assumed my next task was to make sure the scenes ran on time. "I didn't receive a copy of the script," I said. "Do you have a spare one I could use?" He lifted his head. "Peter doesn't use a script," he said. "He explains what he wants his actors to do as he goes along." His mouth twitched, and I felt an undercurrent of humor ripple beneath his tough exterior. I was seeing a different view of him here behind his camera. In the wide world, I had been his enemy, another person trying to extend him sympathy. But on the film set, we were colleagues. Just as Esther sometimes gave me glimpses of the carefree girl she used to be, so I was discovering touches of Hugh that belonged to his former life. There was something else that was different about him that day, too. "Where's Giallo?" I asked. "I thought you two were inseparable." "We usually are," said Hugh, studying the scaffolding that was constructed around the set. "But he can't stand Valerie. He keeps telling her to bugger off." "You taught him that?" I laughed. I found myself warming to Hugh, despite his gruff manner. When the actors were in costume, Peter asked if I could help Leslie with his makeup. I did not have much experience with cosmetics, and found I enjoyed powdering Leslie's face and creating ghoulish circles under his eyes. Leslie checked the result in the mirror. "You've made both sides of my face symmetrical," he said. "Not many people can do that." With Leslie's face close to mine, every time he spoke, the bones in my ears jangled. I wondered how Clara would have coped with his penetrating voice. We waited for Valerie, who was applying her own makeup. She rubbed rouge on her cheeks and darkened her eyelids and brows before adding another layer of powder. Sonny came and sat next to me. Valerie followed his path in the mirror, and a scowl creased her forehead. "So, you're from Europe?" Sonny asked. "Adela. It's a beautiful name." Valerie patted her face violently. A cloud of powder floated around her like dust in a windstorm. Peter and Hugh, who were discussing camera angles, glanced in her direction. "Thank you for the compliment," I told Sonny. "I like your name too. It suits an Australian. The country has so much sunshine." "I'm ready now," announced Valerie, knocking over her stool when she stood up. She leapt onto the set. "You'd better hurry, Sonny," she said. "Time is money." My heart jumped to my throat when Hugh pulled himself up onto the scaffolding and scrambled across it to check the perspectives he wanted. He was dangerously close to the side of the building. If he fell, it was a long drop. Leslie turned to where I was looking and followed Hugh's perilous trail with me. "The wound he sustained in France wasn't serious," Leslie whispered, "but gangrene set in. They took his leg off here in Sydney after he'd languished in veterans' hospitals for months. Peter said a couple of times Hugh has gone missing, and he's found him lingering outside Sydney Hospital, as if waiting for his leg to come back." The picture of Hugh standing outside the place where his life had been shattered tore at my heart. I wished there was some way he could find happiness again. Once the camera had been set, Peter asked me to drop the needle on the gramophone. I did as he asked, and Pachelbel's Canon in D floated on the air. He shouted instructions to Sonny and Valerie. "That's right, Valerie," he said. "Yawn and stretch and climb into bed." Peter did not give me much guidance on my role as a script girl. I tried to keep my eye on the action, but I could not help admiring Hugh's camera technique. He had an extraordinarily steady hand to crank the camera as evenly as he did. After the first take, I realized watching him was more engaging than the picture we were filming. The story was about a newly married couple who move into a house where a man was murdered 10 years before. The ghost returns to demand revenge. A series of events leads to the murderer being found and brought to justice, the ghost departing in peace, and the young couple being able to sleep at night undisturbed. I inwardly scoffed, not only at the predictability of the plot, but the ludicrousness of it. There was no justice for murder victims. Mother was proof of that. By the end of the first week of filming, I was so bored that Clara had to wake me up in the mornings by whistling in my ear. Sonny, I discovered, was not an actor, but a stable hand from Royal Randwick Racecourse, who Peter had talked into being in the film because of his good looks. To describe Sonny's acting as wooden would have been understating the fact. The way he moved his head and legs gave the impression that the rotation of his joints was a third that of ordinary people. He would have been perfect if we were making a horror picture about a stiff Egyptian mummy that had lain in its sarcophagus for thousands of years. Leslie was the opposite. He pulled grotesque faces and used flamboyant gestures to perform the simplest of actions. Whether he had to open a door or peer through a window, he rose on his toes or fell to his knees according to the emotion. Valerie, however, was the worst of all. She wore the same sour expression for everything from shock to ecstasy. "Smile, Valerie," Peter called out. "Laugh with relief and hug Sonny." Valerie responded to Peter's direction by feebly performing the actions required. He could have elicited more emotional depth from a cardboard doll. I took still shots for the film's publicity and wondered how Peter had convinced investors to put money into such an unartistic and disorganized venture. Even the title was uninspiring, The Ghost of Spooky Hill. And this was Peter's third picture? Had the first two been any better? Hugh's camera work, on the other hand, was brilliant. He could not do anything about the non-existent script and stilted acting, but the way he shot the picture transformed it. He filmed everything with a hint of slow motion, which gave the picture a surreal atmosphere that was not there on set. "Most films are taken at 16 frames per second," he explained to me, "but I'm cranking the camera at 22 to create an eerie mood." "Won't that use up more film?" I asked. Hugh looked impressed by my question. "I've already accounted for that. I shot Peter's last film this way." A few days later, when Hugh and I were waiting for Peter to give the actors their directions for the scene we were about to shoot, Hugh asked me if I wanted to look through his camera. "What do you think of the composition?" he asked me. Peter had a habit of placing his actors in a straight line and having them face towards the front of the set rather than each other. The way Hugh had composed the shot, setting the characters against the rear wall, they looked as if they were in a police lineup. Instead of being static, as Peter would have left it, the shot was atmospheric. I was puzzled why a talented cameraman like Hugh was working on this film. I told him that I liked the shot and why. "Not everyone would have picked that up, you know," he said. "You have a keen eye." Clara resorted to splashing cold water on my face the morning of the final day of shooting. I only had another 8 hours to go, but the thought of spending them on a slow and badly performed endeavour was excruciating. Even Peter had appeared to be running out of steam the last few days, and he was supposed to motivate us. Besides that, the weather was turning colder, and staying in bed was more enticing. After some blowing in my ear and bed-rocking from Clara, I managed to wake up in time to catch the tram to Surrey Hills. I was surprised when I arrived at the set to see everyone there except Peter. "He wants you to direct today," said Hugh. "Me?" Valerie sniffed and patted her hair. "Peter's got the measles, and Leslie starts on his new production tomorrow. We have 3 more scenes to go," Hugh said. It would have been more logical to have shot all the scenes performed on the set in one go. But for some reason, perhaps because he did not have a script, Peter had filmed everything in chronological order. We had filmed scenes inside the house, then gone to Macquarie Lighthouse for the cliff scenes, and Rose Bay for some flashbacks. Now we were back at the set, with the weather threatening rain. "All right," I said. "I'll see what I can do." Valerie sniffed. Sonny stomped around, and Leslie pranced as if he were performing in a children's pantomime. I talked them through their performances before we shot each scene. Then I did something Peter had not. I made the actors rehearse. "It leads to unnatural performances," sniffed Valerie. It was the first sentence she had directed at me since we had been working on the picture. I wanted to answer that she could not give a natural performance if she tried, but I needed her cooperation. So I coaxed, coddled, and flattered her. Her acting turned out the same, but Sonny's and Leslie's performances improved. "Good," said Hugh at the end of the last take. "You could direct a film of your own, you know." "I would love to," I confided, "but I'm not sure where I would find the money." "Finding money isn't my forte," Hugh said, packing up his camera. "But if you get it and need someone to film your picture, let me know." Although Hugh's manner was abrupt, his compliment meant a lot to me. My toes tingled at the thought of making a picture with a cameraman of his caliber. I had a vision of us creating something as legendary as D.W. Griffith's Broken Blossoms. "That wouldn't be disloyal to Peter, would it?" I asked. Hugh shook his head. "I think this will be Peter's last film. I've seen the signs." He must have noticed my confusion because he added, "Peter changes his mind about what he wants to do every 2 or 3 years. First it was painting, then dog breeding, and now it's making pictures. I wouldn't be surprised if tomorrow he takes up the piano and decides to compose music." "How does he afford it?" A wry look came to Hugh's eyes. "His family lives in Roseville. They back him." I thought of the messy studio downstairs and the camp bed Peter slept on. Was he acting the part of the poor artist? At the end of the day's shooting, we had a tea party with Lamingtons. Hugh put a jazz record on the gramophone. Sonny clasped Valerie in his arms for the quick-step. She danced as she acted, stiffly. But she seemed to be enjoying herself. Her high-pitched laugh startled me. I had become accustomed to her gloomy temperament. My mind drifted to Philip. I wondered what he was doing. He had not tried to contact me again. Perhaps he had seen the folly of it. "You get along well with Hugh," Leslie said to me. "I've never seen him be friendly to a woman before. He hates them." I remembered the hostile way Hugh had stared at me at the vegetarian cafe and marvelled myself at how his attitude towards me had changed. "Why?" I asked. Leslie took a sip of tea. "He used to be a champion tennis player, you know. He didn't want to go and fight. He thought it was a useless war that had nothing to do with this country. But his fiancée's mother handed him a white feather. Then, when he ended up without a leg, she suggested his fiancée marry someone else.